Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. In January 1947, the remains of a young woman were found in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. The body of the woman, later identified as Elizabeth Short, had been horrifically mutilated by her killer and cut in half at the waist. In the aftermath of her brutal murder, the press began referring to Short as the Black Dahlia and portrayed her as a promiscuous temptress. A complex and extensive investigation involved the identification of some 150 potential suspects, most of whom were eliminated from the inquiry, and numerous letters sent to the press purportedly by the killer. With many rumors and theories surrounding the murder of the Black Dahlia, this haunting case continues to remain as equally unsolved and mysteriously infamous many decades later. On the morning of January 15, 1947, housewife Betty Berzinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter down Leimert Park near 39th and Norton, a residential street in central Los Angeles, when she saw something unusual. Berzinger, who had been on her way to pick up a pair of shoes from the cobbler, moved closer to get a better look. At first, she thought the curious white figure was a broken store mannequin laying a few inches from the sidewalk, but soon she realized it was the body of a woman who had been cut in half and lay laying face up in the dirt. Betty Berzinger quickly covered her young daughter's eyes and then ran to a nearby residential home to call the police. Finis Brown and Harry Hansen were 2 detectives assigned to the case, and by the time they arrived at the scene, located on Norton Avenue between 39th and Coliseum Streets in Los Angeles, it was swarming with reporters and ghoulish gawkers who were all carelessly trampling over any evidence left by the killer. One of the first reporters there that day was reporter Aggie Underwood of the Los Angeles Herald-Express, who took several photos of the body and the crime scene. The detectives ordered everyone away from the ghastly sight and then began examining the scene. The woman was lying with her arms raised above her head at a 45-degree angle, and her lower half was positioned a foot over from her torso, with her legs straight and spread wide open. It appeared almost as though the killer had posed the body, which had been washed clean of blood, with the intestines tucked neatly under the buttocks. From the lack of blood at the scene, it was suspected the murder had taken place elsewhere, and the victim dragged onto the lot, one piece at a time. That overcast morning the weather was cold, and with dew clearly seen under the body, the detectives determined it had been placed there after 2 a.m., when the outside temperature dipped to 38 degrees. Notwithstanding the horrific sight of the body neatly dissected in two, the victim's face had also been hideously defiled. These further mutilations included several cuts on her breasts and thighs, where large portions of flesh had been removed. The killer had used a knife to slash 3-inch gashes into each corner of her mouth, something known as a Glasgow smile, giving her the twisted grin of a deranged clown. There were rope marks on her wrist and ankles, indicating the victim had been restrained and possibly tortured before death. The detectives were able to determine the height of the victim by measuring the 2 halves as 5 feet 6 inches and her weight as roughly 115 pounds. She had mousy brown hair that had been recently henned, and her fingernails were bitten to the quick. There was little evidence left by the killer or killer in the empty lot. However, they noticed that near the body was a heel print on the ground amid the tire tracks, as well as a cement sack containing watery blood was also found nearby. Once the body was retrieved by the Los Angeles County Coroner, the 2 detectives were faced with the daunting task of finding out the identity of this woman who had suffered a sickeningly brutal death. During the 1940s, Los Angeles police and press shared a mutually beneficial relationship, with the reporters using the cops to get the latest inside scoops, and the detectives using the press to disseminate the information they wanted the public to know in the hope it would help solve the case. This latest murder was indicative of this arrangement. Detectives gave the Los Angeles Examiner fingerprints lifted from the dead woman, and reporters used their sound photo machine, a precursor to a modern fax machine, to send enlargements of the prints to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. The prints were compared by FBI technicians against 104 million fingerprints they had on file. A match was quickly made a match to one Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old native of Boston, whose fingerprints had been taken for a mailroom job she once had at an Army base in California, as well as an arrest record for underage drinking in Santa Barbara. The FBI also sent the paper Short's government application photo, and once reporters saw how attractive the victim was, they realized how sensational the story could become. In an effort to garner as much information about Elizabeth Short as they could, several reporters from the Examiner resorted to an underhanded and unethical ploy. They contacted Short's mother Phoebe and explained that her daughter had won a beauty contest. They then started to pry as much personal information about the young woman as they could. Born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, Short was one of 5 daughters born to Phoebe and Cleo Alvin Short Jr. at some point during her childhood. The family moved half an hour north to the town of Medford, and her father launched a successful business building miniature golf courses. However, the 1929 stock market crash left him bankrupt. As he was unable to provide for his large family, Cleo concocted a plan to fake his own death, leaving his car on a local bridge to make it look as if he had jumped into the river in despair. Many years later, when he wrote his wife from California saying he was saving up money to move the family there, Phoebe wanted nothing to do with him. After abandonment of her father, the Short family moved into a cheap apartment building, and Phoebe found a job as a bookkeeper. A childhood friend and neighbor, Mary Passios, recalls that Elizabeth, who was known simply as Bet, became something of a big sister of sorts to her, despite being 10 years her junior. She would often take Passios out for ice cream or to the movies, where the two girls watched all the Ginger Roger and Fred Astaire films that were popular at the time, as well as the debut of Gone with the Wind. It is possible that that small-town theater, Elizabeth Short first became enamored with Hollywood, which began her dreams of being an actress. Born with respiratory problems that developed into asthma and bronchitis as she got older, Short underwent lung surgery at age 15. Afterwards, it was suggested by doctors that she periodically relocate to a milder climate to prevent further respiratory problems. When she was 16, her mother started sending her to spend winters with family friends in Miami, where she found work as a waitress. Short dropped out of Medford High School during her sophomore year, and in late 1942, when her father made contact to reveal he was still alive, Short took a train cross-country at the age of 18 and relocated to Vallejo, California, to start a new life and live with her father Cleo, who she had not seen since she was 6 years old. At that time, he was working at the nearby Mare Island Naval Shipyard on San Francisco Bay. Short had hoped the move to California would see her break into movies. However, arguments between with her father led to her moving out in January 1943. The relationship had been strained from the beginning, mainly because she had not seen him for years. Cleo Short was haunted by regret, and the two were practically strangers living in the same house, often clashing on how things should be. Her father expected Short to act and perform the duties of a maid of sorts, doing the cooking and cleaning, but Elizabeth was a free spirit who wanted nothing to do with domestic chores. She eventually found a job in the mail room at the base exchange at Camp Cook, now Vandenberg Air Force Base, in Lompoc, located 2.5 hours north of Los Angeles. At Camp Cook, Short was surrounded by entire regiments of lonely, sexually frustrated soldiers who were on the verge of being sent to war. She left a trail of broken hearts and erotic longing wherever she went, and the young men who clamored for her attention voted her camp cutie. They told her she was movie star quality, and she briefly lived with one, a U.S. Army Air Force sergeant who reportedly abused her. A few months later, she left Lompoc and moved to Santa Barbara. There, she was arrested on September 23, 1943, for drinking underage at a local bar. She was shipped back home to Medford by juvenile authorities, but instead returned to Florida, after which drifted back and forth across the country, making sporadic visits to her family near Boston, then back to Florida again. She worked in waitressing to pay her way, enjoying the nightlife, frequenting clubs to socialize and dance to bebop and swing jazz. She enjoyed the atmosphere, music, and attention from men, and was never alone unless she wanted it that way. Then, on the last day of December 1944, her bachelorette lifestyle changed when she met a young man who stood out as different from the rest. During her time in Florida, Short became acquainted with a decorated Army Air Force officer of the 2nd Air Commando Group, the Flying Tigers, Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr., who was training for deployment to Southeast Asian Theater during the Second World War. She sent her mother a gushing letter home. "I met someone New Year's Eve, a Major Matt Gordon. I'm so much in love, I'm sure it shows. He is so wonderful, not like other men. And he asked me to marry him." Gordon had indeed written to Short, proposing marriage while he recovered from injuries from a plane crash in India. Short accepted his offer, however it was not to be. In late August, she received a Western Union message. With the Japanese surrender on August 14th, Short was hoping for her fiancé to return home soon, and she was already planning the wedding arrangements. But the message was from Gordon's mother, who told her in the terse missive, "Matt killed in plane crash on way home from India. My sympathy is with you. Pray it isn't so." His death was 4 days before Japan's surrender. Short spent the next few days in a deep depression, reading and rereading Gordon's letters. When the weather turned colder, she returned to Medford that summer, wearing Gordon's pilot wings pinned to her blouses, and started a hope chest, filling it with the hand-embroidered linens he sent her from the Philippines. Moving to Miami, Short distracted her broken heart with an endless parade of young men. Although she enjoyed the company of men from every facet of life, young, old, soldier, lawyer, she held a particular regard for men who had plenty of spending money. Aware of the value of her beauty, she would use her feminine charm, walking down the sidewalk in peak-tied heels, immaculately dressed, to full effect on any passers-by. These men Wolf whistled, gawked, and some even plucked up the courage and offered to buy her dinner, and sometimes she accepted. She was treated to meals, some paid her rent, and others gave her cash. She considered it the least such admirers could do in order to bask in her beauty. Some authors have even asserted that she worked as a prostitute. However, there is no evidence to support such claims. This sort of lifestyle gave Short to opportunity to use her own money she earned through waitressing to expand her wardrobe. Her clothes became an extension of her persona, and whenever she stepped outside, she was always dressed to immaculate perfection. She favored black tailored suits, ruffled blouses, long gloves, and high heels. She became the embodiment of 1940s sophistication. By July 1946, Short returned to Southern California to be close to Joseph Gordon Fickling, a handsome Air Force lieutenant, an old acquaintance with whom she had met in California some 2 years previous, shortly before he was shipped overseas. Fickling was another in a long line of men in uniform, a particular fetish Short developed from her many suitors. The relationship was a turbulent one from the start, as indicated by their private letters, which were confiscated by police during the Black Dahlia murder investigation. Excerpts of these letters appeared in newspapers and showed that Fickling expressed impatience with Short's flirtatious nature, often wondering if he was her main priority over other men. It seemed that Short was either unable or refused to try and convince him otherwise. Fickling moved to Northern California to work as a commercial airline pilot, but the two stayed in touch, and he continued to send her money, including $100 he wired the month before she died. 7 days before her murder, on January 8, 1947, Short sent Fickling her last letter, in which she told him she was moving to Chicago, where she hoped to become a fashion model. When Short's mother Phoebe was approached and questioned by journalists from the Examiner, they callously only revealed the fact she had died once they had gleaned as much as they could from her about her daughter. The newspaper then offered to pay her airfare and accommodations if she would travel to Los Angeles to help with the police investigation. This was yet another ploy, with the tabloid attempting to isolate her from police and other reporters to protect its scoop. The press learned that during the last 6 months of her life, Short moved constantly between a dozen or more hotels, boarding houses, apartments, and private homes in Southern California. Almost always chronically short on cash, she slept wherever she could and paid as little as possible where she couldn't. Between November 13th to December 15th, she worked as a waitress and lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. Living alongside her were 8 other women, who worked in a variety of professions: cocktail waitresses, dancers, and telephone operators. Most of these were from out of town seeking to break into show business. Each paid $1 a day for a bunk bed and a tiny amount of closet space. But Elizabeth Short couldn't even afford this, and often snuck out of a side door to avoid the manager whenever the rent was due. Her roommates were questioned by the LA Times after his death, and said that Short was often out, with a different boyfriend every night, and didn't have a job. She was always going out to prowl Hollywood Boulevard, said 22-year-old Linda Rohr. She was said to have few friends, preferring the company of strangers, and kept only a small group of acquaintances. Her style of dress soon came to the attention of the press, with one Examiner article describing the black tailored suit Short was last seen wearing as a tight skirt and a sheer blouse. As a result, the press gave Elizabeth Short the nickname Black Dahlia, and described her as a promiscuous adulterer who preyed on men for her own sexual and financial gain. One report claimed she was an adventuress who prowled Hollywood Boulevard, and her murder was rumored to have been a sex fiend slaying. Because of the brutal nature of the crime, the Herald Express dubbed Elizabeth Short's murder as the werewolf murder. Elizabeth Short was reportedly never known by the nickname Black Dahlia during her lifetime, and Los Angeles Herald Express reporter Agnes "Aggie" Underwood, who was the first reporter at the scene of the crime, later said the popularization of Short's nickname was the result of information she had received from a Los Angeles Police Department homicide detective. However, Herald Express reporter Bevo Means, who interviewed Short's acquaintances at the Long Beach drugstore she frequented, has been credited with first using the Black Dahlia name. Times copy editor Larry Harnish claims it was a nickname she earned from the staff at the drugstore, and that she did indeed go by it during her lifetime. The name Black Dahlia could also be a reference to the 1946 crime film noir The Blue Dahlia, starring Veronica Lake, about an ex-bomber pilot who is suspected of murdering his unfaithful wife. In some publications, Short is described as an aspiring or would-be actress. However, although she long held a desire to break into acting as a film star, she had no known acting roles or credits. Whatever the truth was about the origin of the Black Dahlia nickname, the press ran with it, publishing sensationalist headlines that caught the attention of the American public in what was the first case to garner public attention since the end of World War II. In an effort to keep certain details of the case secret, the police allowed several inconsistencies to be published. One of these involved the manner of Short's death, and whether or not she had been tortured prior to her murder. This was denied by law enforcement at the time, but they allowed the claims to circulate. As a result, the average citizen became fascinated with the life of this seemingly ordinary woman, who met a particularly gruesome end. Los Angeles County Coroner Frederick Newbar conducted the autopsy of Elizabeth Short on January 16, 1947. It was noted that Short was 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighed 115 pounds, and had light blue eyes with brown hair. It also disclosed a less than flattering detail about Short. Her teeth were in a severe state of decay and plugged with wax. The body had been cut completely in two, using a technique taught in the 1930s called a hemicorporectomy, in which, following the disarticulation of the lumbar spine and transection of the spinal cord, the pelvic contents, lower extremities, and in some cases the external genitalia are removed. It was also been washed thoroughly with gasoline, most likely in an effort to remove any incriminating evidence left by the killer. There appeared to be little bruising along the incision line, suggesting it had been performed post-mortem. There was a gaping laceration, measuring 4 and 1/4 in long, that ran longitudinally along the abdomen. The lacerations on the victim's face, known as a Glasgow smile, ran along each side of the face. The incisions extended from the corners of the lips up to the ears, and measured 3 inches on the right side and 2½ inches on the left. Newbar noted ligature marks on Short's wrists, ankles, and neck, indicating she had been restrained with some type of material, most likely rope. There was also an irregular laceration with superficial tissue loss on her right breast, along with superficial lacerations on the left upper arm, right forearm, and the lower left side of the chest. The skull showed no signs of fracture. However, there was bruising noted on the front and right side of the scalp. One source stated, many years after the crime, that Short's body was covered in cigarette burns inflicted on her while she was still alive. Although she did suffer many horrific mutilations, there was no indication that she was subject to burns, and there is no mention of such wounds in the official autopsy report. Another incorrect misconception involves the coroner who performed the autopsy, Frederick Newbar, suggesting during conversation that Elizabeth Short had been forced to consume feces, as indicated from his findings when examining her stomach contents. However, this claim has been denied by others. Noting a small amount of bleeding on the right side, consistent with blows to the head, Newbar determined the cause of death as massive internal hemorrhaging caused by blows to the head and shock from the violence to her head and face. It was also noted that Short's anal canal was dilated at 1 +3/4 inches, which seemed to suggest she might have been raped. The coroner's report revealed no traces of sperm were found anywhere on her body. However, samples were taken from her body and tested for the presence of sperm, but the results came back negative. Elizabeth Short had died a particularly brutal and painful death, and detectives began their investigation to locate the person responsible. Shortly after the autopsy, The deputy coroner told Herald Express reporter Bevo means that Short wasn't having sex with men, owing to her allegedly small genitalia. Indeed, it was noted in the autopsy report that her uterus was small, but offers no indication that her reproductive organs were anything other than anatomically normal. This in turn led to a series of rumors that circulated widely, which referred to Short as a lesbian who was unable to have sexual intercourse because she suffered from a congenital defect that resulted in gonadal dysgenesis, also known as infantile genitalia. As a result, some reporters began investigating gay bars in the Los Angeles area. Immediately after the discovery of Elizabeth Short's body, around 40 LA police officers conducted a thorough search of the neighborhood and went from house to house looking for clues and any evidence left by the killer. They scoured dumpsters, checked laundromats for blood-stained clothing, and interviewed residents. They came up with no leads. Short's father, Cleo Short, was tracked down and found to be living just a mere 3 miles from where his daughter's body had been dumped in the dirt lot. He told detectives he hadn't seen her for the past 3 years and was apparently still angry that she refused to tend to his domestic needs when she came to live with him in California, but rather spent her time running around. When requested by the coroner to identify the body, he refused. A witness who lived in the area near the vacant lot where Short's body was found came forward to report seeing a man standing next to a parked sedan in the early morning hours of January 15, 1947. The neighbor had been driving past that day to dispose of a bag of lawn clippings in the lot when he saw the man with his vehicle. The right rear door of the sedan was open, and the driving was standing in the lot. The arrival of the neighbor apparently startled the man, who approached his car and peered into the window before returning to his own car and driving away. The owner of the sedan was reportedly followed to his place of work, a local restaurant, and later cleared as a suspect. LAPD investigators focused on the precision with which Short's body had been cut. They thought it must be the handiwork of an expert, and so, according to the FBI, persuaded the University of Southern California, located in the same neighborhood as the corpse was found, to hand over a list of medical students. The Bureau claimed to have been so inundated with handwritten letters to J. Edgar Hoover from individuals claiming to know the identity of the murderer, or who blamed the crime on someone they held a grudge against. One woman wrote the Bureau on May 23, 1947, "This suspect swindled $75 out of me, which he promised would put me in motion pictures and make me famous." In total, around 750 investigators from the LAPD and other departments worked on the Black Dahlia case during the initial stages. This also included 400 sheriff's deputies and 250 California State Patrol officers. A $10,000 reward for information leading police to Short's killer was posted by City Councilman Lloyd G. Davis. Sergeant Finus Brown, one of the lead detectives on the case, would later go on to blame the LA press for compromising the investigation. It was his belief that journalists were guilty of a multitude of unverified reporting, most of which caused a plethora of rumors, half-truths, and outright fabrications to plague the case. Like many high-profile murder cases, the Black Dahlia investigation had its fair share of confessors. With little choice but to follow up on every lead, no matter how preposterous it might seem, the frustrated detectives traveled down every lead and tip, all which eventually led them to a dead end. After the shocking details of the story hit the headlines, and in response to the announcement of a reward, more than 30 confessors came forward to claim they committed the unspeakable crime, most of which were dismissed as fake. These ranged from attention seekers to out-and-out nut jobs, who were all looking to secure their moment of fame in the spotlight. By late January 1947, the first of these confessed their guilt. Surprisingly, the first to claim they carried out the murder were women. The first, Minnie Sepulveda, telephoned LAPD's University station from a bar. She said, "I just stabbed a girl. I killed Elizabeth Short." This claim was quickly dismissed. Police also dismissed the confession of Emily Williams, a former WAC, who suffered from an undescribed mental condition. Another telephone call to the LAPD homicide squad came from 33-year-old Daniel Voorhees, who told them he had murdered Elizabeth Short. After surrendering to police, Voorhees refused to elaborate on his claim, but did say that he dated Short in 1941. However, the facts did not match up to his confession, and he was released. Marvin Hart, a 35-year-old physical culture instructor, was arrested after telling a taxi driver he just killed a man. He was brought in for questioning, and although he lived in the same apartment as Short and dated her a few times, but he seemingly had a solid alibi for the night of the murder. One promising suspect was Joseph Dumais, a good-looking corporal and combat veteran who returned from leave with blood-stained trousers and his pockets full of clippings on the Black Dahlia murder. Although he claimed to suffer from a mental blackout after dating Short, his confession did not hold up and he was sent to an army psychiatrist. There were many others, and precious manpower was wasted proving they were innocent, derailing the search for the real killer. Detective Hansen complained to the press that his office had to sort through letters from pranksters, writing from as far away as El Paso and the Bronx. Detectives questioned more than 20 of Short's former boyfriends, but gained no solid leads from these interviews. It was the theory of many detectives that whoever killed Elizabeth Short wasn't someone she knew, but a rather pickup. They began interviewing thousands of people who had even the slightest knowledge of Short or her acquaintance. Ultimately, hundreds of people confessed to the Black Dahlia murder, and hundreds more offered up their own suspect as the killer. "It is amazing how many people offer up a relative as the killer," said Sergeant John P. St. John, a detective who worked the case until his retirement. All these tips and leads had to be investigated and discounted by the team of detectives. Meanwhile, investigators looked into the last day of Elizabeth Short's life, in an attempt to uncover her movements to determine if those she acquainted with had anything to do with her violent end. In the course of that line of inquiry, they came up with another potential suspect, the last person to see the Black Dahlia alive. One suspect put forward by Stephen Hodel was a successful doctor who lived in an affluent area of Los Angeles, and his own father, George Hodel. During the investigation into the Black Dahlia murder, Hodel came to the attention of detectives in late 1949, after he was arraigned on felony charges during a 3-week trial. The charges stemmed from accusations made by Hodel's daughter, 14-year-old Tamar Hodel, who claimed she was molested and impregnated by her father, who then forced her to have a back-alley abortion. Witnesses at the trial supported these claims, describing the sex act that had taken place at Hodel's Franklin House residence. George Hodel was eventually acquitted of the charges and walked free. This was when investigators, who suspected the involvement of a doctor in the murder of Elizabeth Short, considered Hodel a potential suspect and decided to place him under surveillance. This operation was conducted between February 18, 1950 to March 27, 1950. The purpose of the wiretapping of Hodel's home was to ascertain if he was speaking openly about the Black Dahlia murder. The transcripts were mostly mundane. However, Hodel did make several admissions when in conversation with a person identified only as the Baron, which seemed to implicate him in numerous criminal activities. Hodel can be heard telling this person, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out. Killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary." The secretary was Ruth Spaulding, who worked for Hodel and whose death on May 9, 1945 was deemed a suicide. Further conversations appear to involve an unidentified woman, who can be heard screaming before falling silent. Although officers were monitoring these recordings, no effort was made to intervene, and it is unknown what happened to this woman. Hodel was subsequently considered a suspect by the LAPD in the murder of his secretary Ruth Spaulding, as well as the murder of Louise Springer in June 1949. But it was Hodel's mention of the Black Dahlia that was the most sensational aspect of the eavesdropping operation. By April 1950, Lieutenant Frank Jemison of the Los Angeles County DA's office had gathered enough evidence to charge Hodel. However, in late March 1950, George Hodel suddenly left the country. He spent the next 3 years in Hawaii, then moved to the Philippines, where he remained until 1990. Hodel's involvement in the Black Dahlia case only came to light in 2003, when a George Hodel/Black Dahlia file was discovered in the vault at the Los Angeles County District Attorney's office, revealing him as the prime suspect in the murder of Elizabeth Short. After Hodel's death, his son put forward numerous theories from his own research that implicates George Hodel in numerous unsolved murders. Not only is he considered the prime suspect in the Black Dahlia murder, but his son believes he was also the perpetrator of other unsolved LA murders, as well as the Zodiac Killer who terrorized California. Lieutenant Frank Jemison said, "We know who the Black Dahlia Killer was. He was a doctor, but we didn't have enough to put him away." The DA files confirm that this doctor was George Hodel, with Deputy DA Steve Kay, who conducted a review of the case, gave his legal opinion that the case was solved. On January 9, 1947, Elizabeth Short returned home to Los Angeles after a brief trip to San Diego. She had been in the company of 25-year-old married salesman named Robert Manley, nicknamed Red for his flaming auburn hair. The two had been dating, and according to the press, Manley said he initially picked her up on a street corner in San Diego. He would go on to say he noticed her standing alone, a mysteriously beautiful woman with no apparent destination. He pulled over to ask if she wanted a ride, and initially Short played coy, turning her head and refusing to look at him. But after Manley kept talking, reassuring her that he was no threat and that he just wanted to help her, she allowed him to give her a lift home. During that time, Short was staying with a family who took pity on her after finding her alone at the 24-hour movie theater where she hoped to spend the night. But they soon tired of her behavior, as he often lazed around their small house during the day and spent the evenings out partying. In early January 1947, they asked her to leave. That was when Manley happened upon her and came to pick her up. They stayed together in a local motel, but according to Manley, Short slept in her clothes and the pair didn't have sex. The next day, January 9th, he drove her to Los Angeles and there helped to check her luggage at the bus station. Short told Manley she was going to stay with her sister in Berkeley and planned to meet her downtown at the Biltmore Hotel. Manley accompanied her into the hotel lobby, but took leave of her at 6:30 p.m. and returned to his family in San Diego. It was reported that staff of the Biltmore recalled having seen Short using the lobby telephone. Built in the early 1920s, the Biltmore was a glamorous hotel that attracted wealthy travelers to its luxurious surroundings. The largest hotel in Chicago, with 1,000 rooms, it boasted an impressive lobby, featuring hand-painted cathedral ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and marble floors. Shortly after Short left the Biltmore, she was allegedly seen by patrons of the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge at 754 South Olive Street, located not far away from the Biltmore, an elegant setting that was in stark contrast to the abandoned lot where her brutalized body would be dumped 1 week later. 10 days after her body was discovered, Short's black patent leather purse and one of her black open-toed pumps was found in an alleyway atop a dumpster at 1819th East 25th Street, a short distance from Norton Avenue, located several miles from the crime scene. Robert Manley was called up to identify these items as Short's, which he did, recognizing the shoes in particular. Manley explained that he had paid to the black open-tied pumps resold in San Diego, and said the handbags smelled of the heavy perfume that Short wore, and that had permeated his car as they drove from San Diego to Los Angeles. All of these sordid details were consumed by the 5 daily LA newspaper, who attempted to outdo one another in competition. Someone claiming to be the killer placed a phone call on January 21st, 1947, to the office of James Richardson, the editor of the Examiner, and congratulated him on the newspaper's coverage of the case. The caller said he planned to eventually turn himself in, but not before allowing the police more time to investigate and catch him. The call was ended with the unknown man telling Richardson to expect some souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail. 3 days later, on the same day Short's handbag and shoe were found, a suspicious manila envelope was discovered, addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other Los Angeles papers. In the same way Short's body had been, it reeked of the gasoline the sender used to erase his or her fingerprints from the envelope, leading police to suspect it had been sent by the killer. The words on the front had been compiled using letter cut and pasted from newspaper clippings and read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." Inside the envelope was found Short's birth certificate, business cards, social security card, Matt Gordon's obituary, names written on pieces of paper, photographs, and an address book embossed on the cover with the name Mark Hansen. Although the sender had gone to some trouble to clean the envelope, several fingerprints were lifted and sent to the FBI for testing. However, the prints were compromised in transit and were subsequently of no further use. The owner of the address book was soon identified as Mark Hansen, a wealthy local nightclub and theater owner, who quickly became a suspect. Elizabeth Short had reportedly stayed with friends at Hansen's home, and Hansen was also able to identify the items found as belonging to Short. According to Short's friend and roommate, and Toth, Short had recently spurned Hansen's sexual advances and suggested it as a possible motive for her murder. However, Mark Hansen was soon cleared as a suspect, and detectives were back to square one. In the weeks after her murder, Hansen was one of 150 potential suspects questioned by police. Robert "Red" Manley, The last person to see Elizabeth Short alive was also cleared after he passed several polygraph tests. Hansen's address book contained the name of 75 other men. Police made every effort to track each and every one down, and each of the men told investigators a similar story. They said they met Elizabeth Short, either on the street or at a club or bar, and after buying her drinks or dinner, they never saw her again after she made it clear she was uninterested in a physical relationship. On March 14, 1947, a piece of paper was found tucked in a shoe inside a pile of men's clothing by the ocean's edge at the foot of Breeze Avenue in Venice. It read as an apparent suicide note. To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that or this. Sorry, Mary. The strange pile of clothing had first been spotted by a beach caretaker who reported the discovery to lifeguard Captain John Dillon, who notified Captain L. E. Christensen of West Los Angeles Police Station. The clothing included a coat and trousers of blue herringbone tweed, a brown and white t-shirt, white jockey shorts, tan socks and tan moccasin leisure shoes, size about 8. The clothes gave no clue about the identity of their owner, who was never traced. It was but one more mysterious detail in the case was never resolved. Other letters were received by police, including one in which the author offered to surrender as the perpetrator of the Black Dahlia killing. Police waited at the appointed time, but no one showed. Another letter that followed in which the author insisted he had changed my mind, adding, "You would not give me a square deal." Both the Los Angeles Examiner and the Herald Express were sent letters, although the authenticity of these communications has never been confirmed as originating from the Black Dahlia killer. In all, 13 were known to exist, with some composed of the Kame cut-and-paste style of lettering, while others were handwritten with some signed Black Dahlia Avenger. One aspect of the Elizabeth Short murder investigation was the so-called missing week, between her January 9th disappearance and the discovery of her mutilated body on January 15th. A number of people, none of whom knew Short personally, made contact with detectives and the newspapers to claim they had seen her during that time. None of these alleged sightings were ever confirmed as being Short, but rather ruled out by police who interviewed the witnesses who had, in some cases, misidentified other women they had mistaken for Short. LA newspapers also added to the confusion, with the Los Angeles Herald claiming that Short's murder had taken place at the Astor Motel. In a bizarre episode, the owners of the Astor Motel in Los Angeles did indeed report finding one of their rooms covered in blood and fecal matter on the morning Short's body was found. However, this lead was apparently looked into, and in 1949, LAPD Chief William A. Whartons denied that the Astor Motel had anything to do with the case. From the moment Elizabeth Short left the Biltmore Hotel, after being dropped off by Robert Red Manley, her whereabouts are unknown. What is known is that at some point she met her eventual killer, who subjected her to a horrific ordeal that led to her murder and mutilation, and the dumping of her body in 2 separate parts. The murder of Elizabeth Short was just one of a number of crimes that involved young, often beautiful women, who died insidious deaths or disappeared without trace. For investigators, it seemed there could be the possibility that the Black Dahlia murder was somehow connected to these other crimes, which were suspected by police of being perpetrated by an unidentified serial killer. Almost a month after Short's death, the body of 44-year-old Jean French, known as Nettie, was found in West Los Angeles on Grandview Boulevard, nude and badly beaten. The killer had presumably written on her stomach using lipstick the words, "Fuck you, BD," and the letters TX below. Comparisons were immediately drawn to the Short murder. However, some authors suspect the letters were meant as P.D, standing for Police Department. Despite this, the 2 murders are often considered similar due to the brutal nature in which the victims had died. 1 month later, 43-year-old Evelyn Winters, who was last seen leaving the Albany Hotel, was found bludgeoned and strangled to death in a vacant lot of an abandoned rail yard in Norwalk, California, along the Los Angeles River. 2 months after Winters' death, the body of Laura Eliza Trelstad was found in an oil field on Long Beach Boulevard. The 39-year-old had been sexually assaulted before death, then bludgeoned on the head and strangled with a belt before being thrown from a moving vehicle. Trelstad's killer was dubbed the Mad Werewolf by the press, who speculated it was the same individual who murdered both Jean French and Elizabeth Short. A number of other murders committed before and after Short's slaying have purportedly been associated with the Black Dahlia case, including the infamous murder of 20-year-old oil heiress Georgette Bauerdorf, who was found face down in her bathtub in her apartment in West Hollywood, as well as the July 1946 killing of Gladys Landon and disappearance of 26-year-old Jean Spangler, who vanished under mysterious circumstances in October 1949. Much like the Black Dahlia murder, many of these other crimes were given a sensationalist sobriquet, such the red lipstick murder of Jean French, the red ribbon murder of Olive Laura Hill Gase, the mysterious green twig murder of Louise Springer, as well the killing of Mimi Boombauer in August 1949, that became known as the Happy Widow murder. A similar number of murders had occurred in the decade previous to Short's murder that were committed against women in San Diego, where she had visited with Red Manley. The first such murder occurred in February 1931, when 10-year-old Virginia Brooks, whose body was found in a gunny sack on a mesa near San Diego. In April 1931, the almost completely naked body of 17-year-old Louise Tuber was found suspended from a rope that had been tied to a nearby tree or large bush. She had been beaten about the head before she was hanged in what looked like an apparent staged suicide scene. The only suspect in the case was given an alibi by his wife for the time of the murder. Roughly 8 other murders were committed between April 1931 and July 1947 that involved women who suffered brutal deaths. Although there was little to connect these crimes with the Black Dahlia case, they are indicative of that time when lone women were targeted by men who often carried out such crimes with a sexual motive. The same could not be said for horrific series of murders carried out between 1934 and 1938 by a killer the press nicknamed the Cleveland Torso Murders and the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. As many as 13 victims were found dismembered, their bodies dumped, and in most cases, never identified. A connection between the Cleveland case and the Black Dahlia has been put forward by police detective Peter Marillo, who investigated the Kingsbury Run murders and suspected the same killer of Elizabeth Short and the butcher they hunted were one and the same. Despite this theory, a prime suspect for the dismemberment murders was identified as Dr. Francis Sweeney, who was never convicted. Between June 1945 and January 1946, 3 murders sensationalized by the press as the Lipstick Murders were committed by a killer who wrote a message at one of the crime scenes. Of these killing, the murder of 6-year-old Susan Degnan was reportedly being investigated by Elizabeth Short in the weeks before her own murder. The Lipstick Murders were eventually solved when 17-year-old William Aarons was arrested and charged with the 3 slayings. However, Aarons would claim he had been tortured into confessing by police, and that he was innocent while being made a scapegoat by detectives. Despite many theories that these crimes were committed by the same person who murdered Short, no solid evidence had surfaced to support such claims. By the spring of 1947, the investigation into Elizabeth Short's murder had become a cold case, with few leads. Over 2 years after her murder, a grand jury convened in September 1949 to discuss inadequacies in the LAPD's homicide unit. There were a startling number of murders committed against women and children that remained unsolved. Later that same year, the LAPD would be subject to another grand jury over alleged police corruption in connection with the Brenda Allen scandal. Allen was a madam who owned a Los Angeles brothel and paid off police to keep her business of 114 working girls from coming under scrutiny. This collusion between police and Allen revealed widespread corruption. The investigation eventually led to the resignation of LAPD Chief Clements B. Horrell and significant reform within the LAPD. The Allen scandal would follow on from the Black Dahlia grand jury with something of a common theme. Elizabeth Short had been described by journalists and authors as a prostitute or call girl during her time in Los Angeles. However, the grand jury found no existing evidence that she was ever a prostitute. Of the many suspects investigated, 5 names were mentioned in a formal written report to the grand jury as the prime suspects in the Short murder. Although none of those named as suspects were submitted for consideration for indictment, owing to the investigation's ongoing status, it was revealed later that one of the suspects named was George Hodel. At the conclusion of the grand jury, further investigation was conducted into Short's past, especially her movements between Massachusetts, California, and Florida. Detectives also interviewed people who knew her in New Orleans and Texas. However, no useful information was gained from these interviews, and the case continued to remain unsolved. Elizabeth Short was buried in Oakland's Mountain View Cemetery in a quiet ceremony, attended by only 6 family members. A number of plainclothed policemen were also there, waiting on the off chance that the killer might appear to offer one last goodbye to his victim. Unfortunately, no one suspicious turned up. On February 2, 1947, just 2 weeks after Short's murder, the introduction of a bill calling for the formation of a sex offender registry was called by Republican State Assemblyman C. Don Field, resulting in the state of California becoming the first U.S. state to make the registration of sex offenders mandatory. The investigation into Short's murder failed to bring her killer or killers to justice. Despite police questioning over 150 suspects, no charges were ever brought against any of those named in the formal written report to the grand jury. The most promising prime suspect, George Hodel, suspected in many other crimes, was never charged after he left the U.S. Most, if not all, of the key physical evidence's Black Dahlia case has in the years since been lost, including the original copies of the 13 scornful letters sent by the purported killer to police and press. The FBI has declassified 203 pages of documents related to its own investigation of the murder. With her dyed her mousy brown locks raven black, painted her full lips blood red, and pinned white flowers in her hair, Elizabeth Short embodied the feminine ideal of the 40s. When photographs of her appeared in newspapers, with her alabaster skin and startling light blue eyes, the Black Dahlia became the pin-up girl of Los Angeles noir. Many facts about her life, and even her death, were misconstrued by the media, who resorted to unethical methods to juice up the story. As a result, the death of Elizabeth Short soon made front-page news all across the nation, because it had it all: sex, beauty, and violence, the key ingredients for a newsworthy murder mystery that was news noir at its finest. Case 2. One of the most elusive serial killers, the Zodiac is believed to be responsible for numerous murders throughout the San Francisco Bay Area from 1968 until 1970. The Zodiac Killer usually attacked courting couples at isolated areas, binding then stabbing or ambushing the victims and shooting them dead, leaving few survivors who could offer a description of a killer who enjoyed communicating with police and the press in order to gain recognition for his nefarious crimes. Zodiac sent many letters and complex ciphers to the authorities, daring the authorities to crack his codes and discover his unclaimed victims. By 1974, the Zodiac had claimed 37 victims, but less murders were actually attributed to the killer, despite several earlier crimes dating back to 1963, which appeared strikingly similar to his modus operandi. Eventually the communications stopped, and it was believed the Zodiac had either died or was incarcerated, and despite hundreds of potential suspects, his crimes have so far remained unsolved. Several years before anyone would hear of the Zodiac and his crimes, the murder of a young woman went unsolved in Riverside on Sunday, October 30th, 1966. 18-year-old Sherry Jo Bates was brutally murdered near the parking lot of the Riverside City College's library, just before Halloween. She had been slashed with a knife across her chest area 3 times, once on her back and 7 times across her throat, which had been cut so deep she was nearly decapitated. The killer had managed to lure Bates by disabling her lime green Volkswagen, and then waited for her to return to her car. Almost a month later, the murderer apparently made contact with police. On November 29, 1966, 2 carbon copies of an anonymous letter were sent to the Riverside Enterprise and the Riverside Police claiming responsibility for death of Sherry Jo Bates. The letters sent on April 30th, 1967 to the Riverside Press and Police Department contained a curious symbol which appeared to resemble the letter Z that began with a strange squiggle much like the number 3. The envelopes were mailed with excessive postage, similar to the later letters sent by the Zodiac. It is possible that Sherry Jo Bates was the Zodiac's first victim. The case of the Zodiac Killer began on December 20th, 1968, when 17-year-old David Faraday picked up and his girlfriend, 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen, from her home, telling her parents they were going to a Christmas concert. Instead, he drove them to a lover's lane near Lake Herman Road, where they arrived at around 10:40 p.m. Before this time, a witness later reported spotting a light-colored hardtop, possibly a 4-door Chevrolet Impala, which was parked near the gated entrance to the pumping station, just off Lake Herman Road at around 9 p.m. Not long after this, a young couple, who were parked in the lover's lane, reported another, which passed them heading west towards Vallejo, but then slowly backed up towards them. The driver stared at the young couple, and they felt so ill at ease, they immediately drove off towards Benicia. The car proceeded to follow them until they took the first exit, while the driver continued east to Lake Herman Road. The same light-colored Chevrolet Impala was seen again by another witness at around 10 p.m. At approximately 11:10 p.m., half an hour after arriving at the same spot as the previous couple, Faraday and Jensen were shot to death. A car had pulled up alongside them, and the driver exited the vehicle and began firing at the couple. From the evidence left at the scene, investigators were able to determine from shell casings and footprints that the killer had likely used either a .22 rifle or a handgun loaded with .22 LR ammunition and walked up behind the victim's car, shooting the right rear window and then the left near tire. He then came around to the front left side, and at this point the two teenagers were able to exit the passenger side door of Faraday's brown Rambler in an attempt to escape. It's believed Faraday was killed by a single shot to the head while he was standing by the right rear wheel after scrambling out of the car, and although she managed to get out of the car alive, Jensen's body was found 30 feet from the rear bumper. She had been struck by several bullets, 5 of which penetrated the right of her back, either as she was moving or as she lay wounded on the ground. At approximately 11:10 p.m., half an hour after arriving at the same spot as the previous couple, Faraday and Jensen were shot to death. A car had pulled up alongside them, and the driver exited the vehicle and began firing at the couple. From the evidence left at the scene, investigators were able to determine from shell casings and footprints that the killer had likely used either a .22 rifle or a handgun loaded with .22 LR ammunition and walked up behind the victim's car, shooting the right rear window and then the left near tire. He then came around to the front left side, and at this point the two teenagers were able to exit the passenger side door of Faraday's brown Rambler in an attempt to escape. It's believed Faraday was killed by a single shot to the head while he was standing by the right rear wheel after scrambling out of the car, and although she managed to get out of the car alive, Jensen's body was found 30 feet from the rear bumper. She had been struck by several bullets, 5 of which penetrated the right of her back, either as she was moving or as she lay wounded on the ground. Just 6 months later, another young couple was viciously attacked in the parking lot of the Blue Rock Springs golf course. On July 4, 1969, shortly after 12 a.m., 19-year-old Michael Majo and his friend, 22-year-old Darlene Farron, were sat in Farron's car when they were shot by an unidentified assailant. Majo was able to describe the sequence of events to police in the days after the attack. Earlier in the evening, Farron had picked him up from his house at around 11:30 p.m. to get something to eat together. But Farron said she wanted to talk to him about something, and so they then drove to the Blue Rock Springs Park in Benicia, which was a popular spot with teenagers. When they arrived, Farron switched off the car's headlights and engine, but left music playing on the radio. At this point, several cars arrived at the parking lot with young revelers, hollering, laughing, and throwing firecrackers before driving off soon afterwards. The couple were now alone again in the parking lot, until around midnight when another car, a brown Ford Mustang or Chevy Corvair, drove in from the direction of Vallejo. The driver pulled up next to Farron's car and turned the headlights off and stayed idle for a moment. Then Majo asked Farron if she knew the driver, and she replied, "Oh, never mind," unsure what she meant by this, but before he could inquire further, the driver pulled away and sped off in the direction of Vallejo. Around 10 minutes later, the driver of the brown car returned and pulled up behind and to the right of Majo and Farron, this time leaving his headlights on. The lone occupant then exited his vehicle and walked towards Farron's car holding what appeared to be a flashlight, holding it at arm's length so it obscured his face. Walking up to the passenger's side door, Majo thought the man was an undercover policeman and began to reach for his ID. But as he did this, the man raised the flashlight at arm's length and began firing through the window with a handgun in his other hand. He fired 5 9mm rounds at point-blank range, hitting Majo in the face and body, some of which tore through his body and hit Farron sitting across from him. At this point, Majo kicked himself into the back seat, with another bullet hitting him in his left knee as he did so. The gunman continued to fire at Farron, hitting her several times in each arm, and as she turned away, one struck her in the back. The attacker returned to his car, but then heard Majo cry out in either pain or anger and returned to Farron's car, firing 2 more shots into each victim before he got back into his own car and drove away. Majo believed the shots were quiet or muffled and that the gunman had used a silencer. However, witness George Bryant overheard the earlier firecrackers and then the volley of shots, telling police the gunshots sounded much louder. Before the man drove away, Majo, who was still conscious, managed to turn on the car's blinker lights to summon help, and then opened the passenger side door, and fell out onto the pavement. He saw as the attacker turned his car around and drove out of the parking lot towards Vallejo. He was able to catch a glimpse of the man's profile, and later described him to detectives as around 5'8" tall, heavy-set but not overweight fat, and at least 195 pounds, with a large prominent face. Some teenage drivers in the area discovered the car and victims, but could offer little in the way of help, and so alerted police, who were soon on the scene with an ambulance. Majo was taken directly to surgery, where doctors were able to save his life. He would remain in constant pain after the incident and undergo medical treatment for his injuries. But help came too late for Darlene Ferrin, who died in the ambulance on the way to the Kaiser Foundation Hospital, where she was pronounced dead at 12:38 a.m. At around 12:40 a.m., an unknown made a call through the operator to the Vallejo Police Headquarters. The man told the dispatcher Nancy Slover, "I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." At one point Slover asked the caller's identity and location, but he continued uninterrupted. The call was later traced to a payphone at Tuolumne Street and Springs Road, which was just a few blocks away from the Vallejo Sheriff's Office. The police dispatcher later told detectives that the man spoke in a calm, consistent, and almost scripted fashion, as if he was reading from notes, and that he sounded mature and without accent. The investigation of Vallejo Police Department case number 243146 focused heavily on Majo's eyewitness account of the attack, and his description of a gunman who walked up silently to the car and began firing. He maintained his version of events throughout all his recorded interviews. Police worked on the assumption that Darlene Ferrin possibly knew her killer, basing this on the fact that several calls were made to Darlene's home shortly after the murders, which were answered by her friends while the caller remained silent, and also reports made to police by her close friends, who claimed Darlene might have been stalked or that someone had made unwanted advances towards her in the months prior to her death. Some, including Robert Graysmith, who would later write his own account of the Zodiac murders, contends that Ferrin knew her killer. However, many investigators believe this was never the case, and her own husband Dean Ferrin has stated that she showed no fearful behavior or anxiety during the time leading up to her murder. The stalker in question was believed to be a local man from Vallejo who had shown a great amount of interest in Darlene, but had been rebuffed several times by her and did not take the rejection well. He was eventually tracked down by detectives who confirmed the man was watching fireworks with his wife on the night of July 4th and was at home with her at the time of the murders. Several weeks after the murder of Darlene Ferrin, the San Francisco Chronicle, Vallejo Times-Herald, and San Francisco Examiner each received a letter on July 31st, 1969. The author claimed responsibility for the Vallejo shootings of Michael Majo and Darlene Ferrin, as well as that of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. Accompanying each letter was 1/3 of a cryptogram, which was to be, as instructed by the letter, published on the front page of each newspaper by August 1st. Each letter was worded slightly different, but all contained the same facts and intimate knowledge of the crime scenes of both the Lake Herman Road attack and the shooting at Blue Rock Springs. The writer promised more murders if his demands were not fulfilled. Each letter ended with a symbol, that of a crossed circle, which would soon become the Zodiac's distinctive signature. The first letter transcribed was the one sent to the Vallejo Times-Herald. Dear Editor, I am the killer of the two teen. Ager's last Christ Mass at Lake Herman, and the girl last 4th of July. 2. Prove this I shall state some facts, which only I plus the police know. Christ Mass. 1 brand name of ammo Super X. 210 shots fired. 3 boy was on back feet to car. For girl was lying on right side. Feet to west. 4th of July. 1 girl was wearing patterned pants. 2 boy was also shot in knee. 3 brand name of ammo was Western. Here is a cipher, or that is, part of 1. The other 2 parts have been mailed to the SF Examiner plus the SF Chronicle. I want you to print this cipher on your front page by Friday afternoon, August 1st, 69. If you do not do this, I will go on a kill rampage Friday night that will last the whole weekend. I will cruise around and pick off all stray people or couples that are alone, then move on to kill some more until I have killed over a dozen people. The letter ended with a cross-circled design. The weapon used by the killer was manufactured with an 8-round magazine, and the killer fired at least 9 shots without reloading, which contradicted the killer's subsequent claim that the attack was committed with a 9mm Luger. While a 32-round extended magazine for the Luger had been available for some time, Vallejo police believed the weapon was actually a 9mm Browning high power, which carries 13 rounds in its factory magazine, although the weapon could have been one of several 9-round 9mm handguns available at the time. In a similar letter to the Chronicle, the killer added an additional motivation to publish the code, writing, "In this cipher is my identity." By August 2nd, all 3 letters and ciphers had been published, and the police issued a statement with Vallejo Police Chief Jack Stilts requesting another letter with more details to prove the authenticity of the communication. Although the author claimed his identity was concealed within, the solved cipher did not contain any such a revelation. The police checked the letters for fingerprints, but none were found. However, a possible usable print was lifted from one of the cipher blocks. The FBI was once again contacted to aid in the investigation, and it was the belief of the agency that extortion was a potential motive of the letter writer. A second letter was mailed to the San Francisco Examiner on 1 or August 2nd, in response to Police Chief Stilts's request for additional information, and was received by August 4th. It was a 3-page handwritten letter in which the killer first referred to himself for the first time as the Zodiac. "Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. In answer to your asking for more details about the good times I have had in Vallejo, I shall be very happy to supply even more material. By the way, are the police having a good time with the code? If not, tell them to cheer up. When they do crack it, they will have me. On the 4th of July, I did not open the car door. The window was rolled down already. The boy was originally sitting in the front seat when I began firing. When I fired the first shot at his head, he leaped backwards at the same time, thus spoiling my aim. He ended up on the back seat then, the floor and back dishing out very violently with his legs. That's how I shot him in the knee. I did not leave the scene of the killing with squealing. Tires plus racing engine as described in the Vallejo paper. I drove away, quite slowly so as not to draw attention to my car. The man who told police that my car was brown was a Negro about 40 to 45, rather shabbily dressed. I was in this phone booth having some fun with the Vallejo cop when he was walking by. When I hung the phone up, the damn thing began to ring, and that drew his attention to me plus my car. Last Christ Mass. In that episode the police were wondering how I could shoot plus hit my victims in the dark. They did not openly state this, but implied this by saying it was a well-lit night plus I could see silhouettes on the horizon. Bullshit, that area is surrounded by high hills plus trees. What I did was tape a small pencil flash light to the barrel of my gun. If you notice, in the center of the beam of light, if you aim it at a wall or ceiling, you will see a black or dark spot in the center of the circle of light about 3 to 6 inches across. When taped to a gun barrel, the bullet will strike exactly in the center of the black dot in the light. All I had to do was spray them as if it was a water hose. There was no need to use the gun sights. I was not happy to see that I did not get front page cover. Age. The Zodiac added his cross-circled design at the bottom of the letter. No address. The authenticity of this letter was initially called into question. Both Majo and George Bryant recalled how the Zodiac drove off at high speed, despite his claim in this letter that he had calmly remained under the speed limit. Because the Vallejo police were mostly unsuccessful in developing fingerprints from the first 3 letters, they sent this latest letter directly to the FBI crime lab. Technicians determined the letter had been written on Woolworth's Fifth Avenue brand paper, and several latent prints were found on the 2nd and 3rd pages. But these prints have never been matched to a suspect. The 3-part 408 symbol cryptogram was solved by North Salinas High School teacher Donald Harden and his wife Betty, who submitted it to the Vallejo Police Department on August 8. It was verified by the cryptographic unit at Skaggs Island Naval Communications Center and published the following day by the San Francisco Chronicle and the Vallejo Times-Herald. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part is THA, when I die I will be reborn in Paradise, and all the I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name, because you will try to SLOI down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife. Ebioriedameth Piti. The cryptogram contained numerous misspellings similar to the letters, and ended with 18 symbols which could not be deciphered. Their meaning remains unknown. By August 10, 1969, an anonymous individual mailed the key to the cryptogram to the Vallejo Police Department the day after the hardened solution was made public. The letter containing the solution was sent to VPD Sergeant John Lynch and contained a typewritten address postmarked San Francisco. The key was written on a white sheet of paper and was accompanied by a short typewritten note on a 3x5 index card which stated, "Dear Sergeant Lynch, I hope the enclosed key will prove to be beneficial to you in connection with the cipher. Letter writer. Working puzzles, cryptograms, and word puzzles is one of my pleasures. Please forgive the absence of my signature or name, as I do not wish to have my name in the papers, and it could be mentioned by a slip of the tongue. With best wishes, concerned citizen." The FBI expressed their opinion that the cipher key was generally valid and substantially accurate, but commented how the author could easily have read the description of the decryption in the newspaper provided by Donald Hardin and his wife. It is entirely possible the author of the concerned citizen card had been unaware that the code had been solved. Only one usable palm print was lifted from the envelope, but again this has never been matched to any individual or known suspect. On Saturday, September 27, 1969, 3 young women from Angwin arrived at Lake Berryessa, which was located about 60 miles northeast of San Francisco in Napa County. At around 3 p.m., they pulled into the parking lot near the lake and noticed a man driving what looked like a 1966 model, light blue, 2-door Chevrolet with California plates pull up beside them. He drove past them before stopping, then backed up, so he was parked right next to their car. The man sat there looking down, as though he was reading something. The women walked down to the lakeshore where they sunbathed for about 30 minutes, and noticed the man was watching them. He was later described as clean-cut and nice-looking, around 6 feet tall, over 200 pounds, with short dark hair parted on the side. He was wearing a black short-sleeved sweatshirt over a t-shirt and black or dark blue slacks. After 20 minutes of watching the women and smoking cigarettes, the man walked off. When the women returned to their own car at around 4:30 p.m., the stranger's vehicle was gone. Lake Berryessa was also visited that day by Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, 2 Pacific Union students who made a spontaneous trip from Angwin. The young couple were picnicking at Twin Oak Ridge, which is a peninsula on the western shore of the lake. At around twilight, they were approached by a man. Cecilia was the first to spot the stranger, who was wearing glasses, and Hartnell later described him as about 5'8" to 6 foot tall, with dark brown greasy combed hair, of a heavy-set weight, and wearing a dark jacket and dark clothing. He said he initially thought the man was in his 30s and fairly unremarkable, but once he got closer, Hartnell said he was younger and larger. Before he got too close, however, the man hid himself behind 2 nearby trees where he donned what appeared to be an unusual homemade four-cornered hood, and then emerged roughly 20 feet away from the couple. Hartnell later described the hood as well sewn, black in color with holes cut for the mouth and eyes. The man had attached a pair of dark sunglasses to further conceal his identity, and wore a belt with a long wooden sheathed knife and an empty leather holster. There was a bib section that fell down towards the man's waistline that had an embroidered cross-circle design. This design was the same as the symbol on the 3-part cryptogram and the cover letters, which would be used as the Zodiac Killer's signature on all future letters. As he approached the couple, the man was holding a large semi-automatic pistol in his right hand, pointing it as he spoke in a calm, monotone voice. "I want your money and your car keys. I want your car to go to Mexico," he told Hartnell, who handed him the keys to his Volkswagen as well as all the coins in his pockets. The man put the coins in his pocket and dropped the keys on top of the picnic basket, holstering his weapon. At this point, Hartnell attempted to offer the man help as a way of getting out of the situation, but he responded, "No, time's running short." He then told the couple he was an escaped convict from the Pacific Northwest, killing a guard in the process, and that he had a stolen car and nothing to lose. "I'm flat broke." The killer mentioned the town he had escaped from, which generated some confusion, primarily because Hartnell was unable to recall if Montana or Colorado was mentioned. It is generally believed the place was Deer Lodge, Montana, but the story is considered a ruse by the killer, because Hartnell recalled the man had a slight lilt or drawl but no accent, and there were no reports of a jailbreak or murder ever having occurred at that time. Hartnell made another attempt to calm the situation by talking to the man for several minutes about his car. This made little difference, as the man removed some clothesline from his belt and demanded Shepard hogtie Hartnell, and when he protested, the man began to shout, "Get down, right now." As Shepard acquiesced to his demand, she removed her purse and threw it towards the man, who ignored it, and when she had finished binding her friend, the hooded man began to tie her up and tighten the knots on Hartnell. During this, he noticed the stranger seemed nervous because his hands were shaking. When he was finished, the man told the couple, "I'm going to have to stab you people." In an attempt to protect his friend, Hartnell said, "Stab me first," to which the stranger replied, "I'll do just that." The man used what appeared to be a foot-long, double-edged bayonet, which was later described as looking like it had been damaged, with rudimentary repairs made to the handle. The man stabbed Hartnell 6 times and Shepard 10 times, which in her case proved fatal. After leaving both for dead, the hooded attacker walked to Hartnell's car parked nearby and scrawled a message on the door with a black magic marker, leaving the cross-circle signature of the Zodiac and the dates of his Bay Area attacks. A little over an hour later, the killer placed a call through to the operator of the local police, which went through to the Napa Police Department switchboard at 7:40 p.m. In a calm voice, the caller declared, "I want to report a murder, no, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia." When the operator attempted to ask where he was calling from, the man said quietly, "I'm the one that did it." He then dropped the receiver and walked away. Similar to the case in Vallejo, the call was traced to a payphone outside a car wash at 1231 Main Street in Napa, which was in close proximity to the police station. Arriving at the crime scene, detectives found a set of clear footprints which led to and from the area of the attack. These shoe imprints were later determined to have been made by a pair of size 10.5 wing walkers, a style of military boots worn by a heavy-set man due to the deep impressions left in the sand. A clear palm print was lifted off the receiver. However, the evidence technician was so nervous when securing it that he caused it to be smudged during the process, ruining what would have been important evidence. As part of Napa County Sheriff's Department case number 105907, detectives investigated another encounter that same evening at the lake. Around 6:30 p.m., a local dentist and his son recalled seeing a man walking nearby who matched the description given by the women from Angwin. They recalled how he turned and walked away when realizing he had been noticed. However, this area was further north from the crime scene, and because no car was spotted, police believe this was not connected to the Zodiac attack, as it would have been impossible for the man to arrive at Lake Berryessa within that time frame. In subsequent years, there has been considerable doubt cast upon the authenticity of the Lake Berryessa attack as a Zodiac-related incident. There was a significant deviation in the established pattern employed at the other Bay Area attacks, and there is little to no evidence which connects the Zodiac to this crime as there is for the Vallejo and San Francisco murders. The handwriting left on Hartnell's car does appear somewhat similar to the Zodiac's letters, but due to the circumstances and posture of the killer, it cannot be definitively linked. Furthermore, the Zodiac never claimed credit for this attack in any letters, as he had done for the Vallejo and San Francisco attacks. This attack involved a significant exchange of words between the killer and victims. During this encounter, he fabricated a story about escaping from prison in the Northwest, telling the students he needed their money and car keys, but only took Hartnell's pocket change and left the keys and Shepard's wallet on the picnic blanket. Unlike previous attacks, he tied them up and used a knife rather than simply shooting them with the pistol he had used to subdue them. Despite these changes in MO, he signed the door with his distinctive and easily recognizable cross-circle symbol and crime chronology. The details of an earlier Riverside murder was omitted from the chronology, leading many to believe this was evidence he was not responsible for that crime. In contrast, there are those who argue that the use of the knife rather than a pistol, and that wearing of the hood indicates the Berryessa attack was of ritual significance to the killer. The use of the hood has remained unexplained, but it was most probably utilized to instill fear and terror in his victims. Hartnell would later comment how the killer seemed to lose control during what he described as a frenzied assault on Shepard. The use of the knife could also be explained away as a tactical decision, because the killer had chosen an open location at the lakeside and used a more silent weapon which would not attract attention. The use of the four-cornered hood which the killer put on prior to approaching the couple is considered a curious factor. The design is unique, perhaps even rare, and the killer made no attempts to explain it to his victims or subsequent to the press in any known communication. By employing such a hood, the killer had presumably wished to conceal his identity, given that the attack occurred in broad daylight, but the same effect could have been achieved by using a readily available ski mask or other common item of clothing. The killer went to considerable effort in designing and making the hood himself. The differences between the other Bay Area attacks and the lakeside incident include the weapon, time of day, lingering in the area, and the absence of a follow-up letter offering confirmation of the author's culpability, which have been outweighed by more circumstantial evidence such as the general description of the suspect, his weight, similar handwriting, and unusual phone call made after the incident. His behavioral change in MO and signature have also been explained as the developing boldness, opportunity, and selfish needs of an escalating serial killer. Although the possibility of two killers operating independently of each other in the same general area is not within the realms of fantasy, but it cannot be denied that the Zodiac's desire for publicity would compel him to either deny culpability or present a false confirmation, as he would later potentially do for the murder of Sherry Jo Bates at Riverside. Most investigators believe the Lake Berryessa attack to be the work of the Zodiac, because a copycat would have to have been of similar height, weight, and an expert at forging the killer's distinctive handwriting, along with possessing an understanding of the killer's need for situational control. Meanwhile, the true killer would have had to suppress his most identifiable character trait, the desire to earn recognition for his crimes. While this theory has intrigued some armchair sleuths, it is generally considered far-fetched given the number of coincidences available. During the lengthy Zodiac investigation, detectives working the case received hundreds, possibly thousands of tips on potential suspects. One such tip provided to the Vallejo Police Department was that of a man who would go on to become the prime suspect in the case. On October 6, 1969, Vallejo Detective John Lynch attended Elmer Cave Elementary School, where he spoke with Arthur Lee Allen, who was questioned on his whereabouts during the attack at Lake Berryessa. Allen claimed he was skin diving on Salt Point Ranch, and nothing further came from the interview. Because of the uncanny amount of circumstantial evidence pointing towards his guilt, coupled with his odd behavior, Arthur Lee Allen would remain a person of interest in the case for the rest of his life. It was known Allen owned several handguns, one of which he allegedly always kept in his car, and he apparently enjoyed the notoriety that came with his 1969 interview with Detective Lynch, and bragged openly that he was a Zodiac suspect. The next day, October 7th, a letter arrived addressed to Sergeant John Lynch of the Vallejo Police Department. Postmarked San Mateo, the letter was signed by a good citizen, and when investigators came across the card years later, it contained a footnote from Sergeant Lynch, in which he states the writer claimed a strong feeling of ESP, extrasensory perception, and while having these feelings, the author used a pencil to write. On one occasion, the pencil formed a sentence. Go to 56 Beach Street. I get the name Jerry, perhaps he knows people, or his name is XXXXXXX. This lead came to nothing. It wasn't long before the Zodiac Killer would choose his next victim. Just 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, 29-year-old San Francisco cab driver Paul Stein picked up a male passenger at the corner of Mason and Geary Streets at Union Square. Stein called in the destination to the dispatcher and entered the details into his log, which was towards the corner of Washington and Maple Streets in Presidio Heights. As the cab stopped at the intersection of Washington and Cherry Streets, the passenger pulled out a gun and shot Stein point blank in the right side of the head. Witnesses recalled seeing the man remove Stein's wallet and keys from his pockets, and then proceed to cut a large piece from the back of his shirt, which he then soaked in the dead man's blood, taking it with him. Teenage siblings who witnessed the murder from the second floor of 3899 Washington, located directly across the street, immediately called the police, which was logged at 9:58 p.m. They would later tell detectives that as the killer exited the vehicle, he wiped down part of the interior and exterior of the cab, momentarily leaning on the driver's side door frame. He then walked slowly north towards Cherry Street. One glaring mistake by police would have significant consequences. When the police dispatcher broadcast the description of the killer, it was incorrectly given as a black male. As a result, when responding patrolman Eric Zelms and Donald Fawkes noticed a heavy-set white male walking east on Jackson Street. They did not believe he was a potential suspect. When the description was corrected and an intensive search began, the killer was nowhere to be seen, most likely using a nearby vehicle to escape. In subsequent interviews, both Fawkes and Zelms would state that the man they saw appeared to be in no hurry, walking along with a hunched gait with his head bent slightly forward. Officer Fawkes made a statement, dated November 12, 1969, in which he noted his recollection of the man as WMA 35-45, years old, about 5 feet 10 inches, 180 to 200 pounds. Medium heavy build, barrel-chested, medium complexion with light-colored hair possibly graying in rear. He added that the suspect was wearing elastic cuffs and waistband zipped partway up, brown wool pants pleated type baggy in rear, and may have been wearing low-cut shoes. Fawkes would later state, "Since we were looking for a Negro male adult, we proceeded on Jackson Street toward Arguello, continuing our search. As we arrived at Arguello Street, the description was changed to a white male adult. Believing that this suspect was possibly the one involved in the shooting, we entered the Presidio of San Francisco and conducted a search on West Pacific Avenue on the opposite side of the wall in the last direction we observed the suspect going. We did not find the suspect." In his book, Zodiac, Robert Graysmith includes a passage detailing an exchange between the officers and the white male suspect seen on Jackson Street, where they asked the man if he had seen anything strange. However, this conversation was never recorded in any police reports on the incident, and is possibly based on the subsequent letter sent to authorities in which the killer claims he spoke with the police. If indeed the Zodiac spoke with officers, and then walked away from the scene of a crime, then SFPD homicide case number 696314 would be a potentially embarrassing situation for the San Francisco Police Department, and one of the biggest missed opportunities to catch the Zodiac Killer immediately in the aftermath of committing a crime. At the crime scene, forensic experts found numerous usable prints, including 30-finger, 3-palm and 1-palm or lower finger print found in and on the outside of the car. Technicians found the finger/palm print on the passenger side front door handle. This clear print was possibly left by the killer, but could also have been left by responding police, fire, or forensic officers who arrived at the scene. Several other prints were left in blood, which were believed to be left by the suspect. However, none of these were clear. Subsequently, none of the prints recovered were ever matched to any suspects held within the database of the FBI's National Crime Identification Computer System. A pair of men's leather gloves, size 7, were found inside the cab, but it was never established if they were left by the killer. The bullet recovered from the crime scene was erroneously recorded as a .38, but would later be correctly identified after ballistic tests confirmed it to be a 9mm. However, it was considered the same 9mm ammunition was that used during the Blue Rock Springs attack on July 4, 1969, when Darlene Ferrin was killed and Michael Mageau wounded. Bill Armstrong and famed detective Dave Toschi were now assigned to the case. 2 days after the Paul Stein murder, the SF Chronicle received a letter from the Zodiac which claimed responsibility for the crime. The killer had drawn his now well-known cross-circle design on the envelope in place of the return address. Inside was a note which read, "Please rush to editor," and a swath of blood-soaked material later confirmed as part of Paul Stein's shirt, which had been cut away and taken by the killer. The Zodiac would sending 3 bloody swatches from Paul Stein's shirt in future letters. However, 104 square inches of the material would remain unaccounted for, presumably kept by the killer as a gruesome trophy. Although 3 fingerprints were found on the paper, they have never been matched to any suspect. The letter also claimed responsibility for the other crimes attributed to the Zodiac, including the Lake Berryessa incident, and also made a threat to target school children with his next attack. This is the Zodiac speaking. "I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington St. plus Maple St. last night. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. I am the same man who did in the people in the North Bay area. The SF police could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly, instead of holding road races with their motorcycles, seeing who could make the most noise. The car drivers should have just parked their cars and sat there, quietly waiting for me to come out of cover. School children make nice targ. ETS, I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire, plus then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. The murder of Paul Stein was different to the Zodiac's previous victim choice. When previously he always targeted courting couples, the murder of a lone victim now caused significant panic among the citizens of San Francisco because the killer had broken his pattern, meaning anyone could now be a potential victim. He had also changed the time frame and geographic choice for his attacks. This time choosing to murder in downtown San Francisco during the evening, when his previous attacks had taken place in remote suburban areas near water after sundown on weekends. There was now a real fear the Zodiacs would follow through with his threat to wipe out a bus full of school children, which would be something he would allude to in future communications, even going so far as to draw a diagram of his plan. The Chronicle suppressed the school bus threat for a week for fear of causing undue panic. The teenaged witnesses worked with police to create a composite of the suspect they saw exiting Paul Stein's cab, which was then amended to incorporate the descriptions given by the patrolman who saw the suspect as Cherry Street. It was then released with the full content of the letter on October 18, 1969. During this time, the Zodiac case would generate a greater level of press coverage and public interest, as well as attention from other police forces along the West Coast, who now began to look at their own cold case files, believing the Zodiac could be a potential suspect in their own unsolved crimes. The chief of Riverside Police, Kincaid, sent a 3-page summary of the Bates murder case over to investigators in Solano, Napa, and San Francisco. However, it would be lost for over a year. A curious episode in the Zodiac case occurred at 2 a.m. on October 20th, 1969, when a man who claimed to be the Zodiac contacted the Oakland Police Department and made a demand that a high-profile lawyer appear on a local KGO-TV television show called AM San Francisco, hosted by Jim Dunbar. The caller requested either F. Lee Bailey or Melvin Belli, and while Bailey was unavailable, Belli agreed to appear on the show. Later that morning, Belli appeared on the show alongside host Jim Dunbar, who made a request to keep the line clear. Someone then called the station numerous times, telling Belli his name was Sam, and that he was the Zodiac. Belli spoke briefly with the man, who said, "I want help," but refused to reveal his identity, claiming that he was afraid of being sent to the gas chamber. Dunbar asked the caller if he had previously contacted the show. "Did you attempt to call this program one other time when Mr. Belli was with us?" he asked. This seems to indicate that the Zodiac Killer had attempted to make contact with the San Francisco TV show just a few days prior to the Presidio Heights murder of Paul Stein. It is also possible that caller was a crank and had nothing to do with the Zodiac. Belli told Sam, "All of San Francisco wants to help you. The hand is out, you can feel the hands out." Over the course of 20 minutes and 13 abrupt conversations, during which he attempted to draw the caller into conversation, Belli was repeatedly cut short as the man gave 1- or 2-word answers, so that police could not trace the call. He and Sam eventually agreed to set up a meeting outside a shop on Mission Street in Daly City, but the caller never showed at the rendezvous. The calls were eventually traced back to Eric while a patient at a mental institution. When the 340 cipher was decoded in December 2020, the Zodiac confirmed he was not the caller, stating, "That wasn't me on the TV show." The following month, the Chronicle received another letter from the Zodiac in early November. The envelope was sent with the usual double postage, and "Please rush to editor" was written underneath the address. The contents included a Jester's brand greeting card with a drawing of a dripping pen with the words, "Sorry I haven't written, but I just washed my pen," while inside the card it continued, "And I can't do a thing with it." Along with the card was a long 340-character cipher and the usual misspelled message in the Zodiac's own unique handwriting. This letter was the first to contain what appeared to be a body count, kept by the killer, of how many victims, or slaves as he referred to them, that he had claimed so far. This presented something of a conundrum for investigators, because so far the number of victims attributed to the killer was 6, not 7 as claimed in the latest letter. The letter also possibly included a swatch of bloody shirt from Paul Stein, dispelling any doubts the killer was the author of the letter. However, there is uncertainty if it was sent with this or the following letter. "This is the Zodiac speaking. I thought you would need a good laugh before you get the bad news. You won't get the news for a while yet. P.S. Could you print this new cipher on your front page? I get awfully lonely when I am ignored, so lonely I could do my thing. Des July August. September October equals 7. Several days later, another letter was sent to the Chronicle, which was received the same day as the previous dripping pen card. The Chronicle made copies of both letters before passing them on to investigators. This letter contained the usual note with "Please rush to editor" written on it, along with a lengthy handwritten communication in the now distinctive Zodiac handwriting, along with a schematic drawing. This was of something the Zodiac referred to as a death machine, which he claimed was rigged and ready to explode when driven over by a bus. According to a source at the SFPD, there were one or more latent prints that were possibly developed, but nothing definitive was ever made public. The 340-character cryptogram was considered undecipherable, the contents remaining a mystery for 51 years until December 2020. It is unknown what the significance of the 5 X's along the Zodiac's cross-circle symbol, but some have speculated it could denote victims. However, the Zodiac had claimed 7 victims in his November 8th letter, while the Bates murder had not been considered as a potential Zodiac crime yet, and there is still doubt the Zodiac's responsibility for that murder as it differed from any subsequent known attacks. The schematic drawing of the death machine remained unpublished until 1996 when it was posted online by Michael Rusconi and Douglas Oswell. Towards the end of the year in late December, the Zodiac sent a Christmas card on the 20th, this time to lawyer Melvin Belli, who had been involved in the likely Zodiac hoax on Jim Dunbar's morning show Yem San Francisco. It had been forwarded to his office and was opened by his secretary, who found it contained a letter and another blood-soaked swatch of Paul Stein's shirt. The back of the envelope contained the words, "Mary's Mass plus New Year," and the letter was an apparent plea from the killer who requested help from Belli. Although the authenticity of the letter was never in question due to the author sending another swatch of blood-soaked shirt, the writing on this particular letter was somewhat different from all previous correspondence sent by the Zodiac. It appeared the killer had deliberately altered his handwriting, even though his previous writing style began to emerge towards the end of the letter, and despite the apparent plea for help, the letter seemed too meticulously planned to be spontaneous. The latest letter also alluded to an undisclosed 8th victim, with the Zodiac threatening to claim his 9th and 10th if not helped. This would be the last time the Zodiac contacted Melvin Belli, despite several publicity events organized by the lawyer, and this would be the last letter of 1969, with nothing more was heard from the killer for 3 months. By 1970, the Zodiac case was being investigated for possible links to other crimes. The killer had claimed upwards of 8 victims so far, and investigators and reporters were now attempting to discover the killer's apparent unclaimed victims. One such reporter, Paul Avery of the San Francisco Chronicle, had been reporting on the Zodiac case ever the first murders, and had stumbled upon the 1966 murder in Riverside of Sherry Jo Bates, believing it could possibly be linked to the same killer. While many suspect the Zodiac had limited his crimes to the Bay Area, others like Avery and Riverside detectives now suspected the Zodiac's involvement. The similarities, such as the letters sent to the media and the victim's family, seemed to indicate someone of a similar mindset to the Zodiac was responsible, but there were also differences which garnered skepticism. Riverside Captain Erwin Cross expressed his doubts the Zodiac was the culprit, and opinion was divided on whether it was the same person. The Zodiac's involvement in Sherry Jo Bates' murder would remain in doubt, and there is little evidence to either implicate or exclude the Zodiac as the killer. Although the Zodiac never explicitly claimed Bates as a victim, he did allude to what he referred to as his Riverside activity in a future letter. But then it has been suggested the killer would often take credit for crimes he did not commit. In the early evening hours of March 22, 1970, 23-year-old Kathleen Johns was driving with her infant daughter Jennifer on Highway 132 in San Joaquin County, when a man driving a light-colored American car began blinking his lights and honking his horn in an attempt to gain her attention. He then drove alongside her, leaned out of his window and shouted that one of her wheels was loose and offered his assistance. The man followed Johns as she pulled over at the turnoff by Bird Road, just west of Interstate 5, which was several miles west of Modesto. He retrieved a lug wrench from his car and then pretended to tighten the nuts on the rear right side wheel. However, he actually removed them completely. When she drove off, the entire wheel came loose, and once again the man offered to help by driving her to the nearest service station. Accepting his hospitality, Johns and her baby rode up front with the man who drove westwards on the 132, eventually pulling into a station on Herman Road, which was closed. They then drove aimlessly around the city of Tracy in relative silence for over an hour and a half, passing several other service stations on the journey. When Johns asked why they didn't stop at those stations, the driver replied cryptically that they were not the right ones. At this point, Johns became very scared of the man, but did not want to get out of the car or tell him to stop and let her out. She soon realized the man had no intention of taking her to a service station for help, and despite fearing for her own safety and that of her child, she attempted to make conversation. When she asked him if he often helped people in need like this, he replied, "By the time I get through with them, they won't need my help." The nightmare journey continued, with the driver appearing to slow down, as if about to pull over before speeding up again. Eventually, Johns decided she must escape, and when the man stopped just short of a stop sign, she seized her opportunity and, holding her baby tightly, she jumped from the car. Running across a nearby field and up the embankment, she hid herself in the darkness. The man then turned off his headlights, moved some small distance before stopping, waiting silently in his car to see if she made another run for it. After waiting for 5 minutes, he turned the car lights on and drove away. Kathleen Johns was rescued by a passing motorist who drove to the local police station in Paterson. As she sat waiting to be interviewed by officers, she saw a wanted poster with a composite sketch of a man on the wall and positively identified it as the stranger who had terrorized her and her infant daughter. The sketch in question was that of the Zodiac Killer. The terrified desk sergeant had Johns wait alone in a nearby cafe to await the return of her car, the last known location of which was broadcast to officers in an attempt to locate it. The vehicle was eventually discovered near the interstate intersection by a Stanislaus County Sheriff's deputy, who found it almost completely burned out and still smoldering upon his arrival. John's abductor had apparently returned to her car and set it on fire, hoping to destroy any evidence that might be found within. Articles appeared in both the San Francisco Examiner and Modesto Bee which covered the terrifying evening Johns experienced, and which matched the eyewitness statement in the police reports. Several months after the incident, the circumstances of John's account was also published in a San Francisco Chronicle article written by Paul Avery. This version is generally accepted as the correct version of events, despite Johns giving varied accounts of her ordeal in subsequent interviews over the years, and appears in Robert Graysmith's Zodiac. Johns would go on to identify 2 different men as the assailant who kidnapped her and her child. However, she later admitted her memory was not to be trusted because she was unable to remember certain facts, most notably if she was even legally married at the time. The incident where Kathleen Johns was abducted is believed to be the last time anyone saw the Zodiac. However, the elusive serial killer would continue his letter-writing campaign for some considerable time, while claiming an ever-growing number of victims that law enforcement had never been able to verify. In his letter dated November 9, 1969, the Zodiac wrote, "When I commit my murders, they shall look like routine robberies, killings of anger, plus a few fake accidents, etc. It is possible that he is responsible for other murders for which he never claimed credit." On April 19, 1970, the body of Robert Salem was found in his upscale San Francisco apartment. The 40-year-old lamp designer had been repeatedly stabbed with a long-bladed knife, the killer apparently having tried to decapitate his victim, and when that failed, he cut off Salem's left ear and carried it away from the scene of the crime. It was believed that Salem was murdered on April 15th, several days before the discovery of his body. Slogans were found painted on the wall of Salem's apartment. Written in blood were the words "Satan Saves" and "Zodiac." Several months later, on July 13, 1970, 2 men were arrested during an accident. One of the men made the shocking confession that he was a cannibal. Stanley Dean Baker and Harry Allen Stroop were both carrying human body parts when arrested, and they claimed to belong to a satanic cult. The remains belonged to James Michael Schlosser, who had been reported missing from the town of Roundup. Furthermore, Baker confessed to having committed the Salem murder on behalf of the cult's leader, the Grand Chingguan. At the time, some suspected the slogans "Satan Saves" and "Zodiac," painted in blood on the wall of Salem's home, had been done in order to stir up panic during an already heightened and tense atmosphere caused by the revelations from the Manson murder trial. A suspect, although Stanley Dean Baker, who was in the Bay Area during the time of the murder, had confessed to the crime, he was never charged with the death of Robert Salem. The case is still officially unsolved. The next communication from the killer was sent on April 20th, 1970. It was sent to the Chronicle, and a note inside was addressed to the editor. The letter included a small cipher of just 13 symbols, which apparently contained the Zodiac's real name, along with a detailed diagram plan for what was described as a modified bus bomb. This is the Zodiac speaking. By the way, have you cracked the last cipher I sent you? My name is. I am mildly serious as to how much money you have on my head now. I hope you do not think that I was the one who wiped out that blue meanie with a bomb at the cop station, even though I talked about killing school children with one. It just wouldn't do to move in on someone else's territory. But there is more glory in killing a cop than a Sid, because a cop can shoot back. I have killed 10 people to date. It would have been a lot more, except that my bus bomb was a dud. I was swamped out by the rain we had a while back. The new bomb is set up like this. The Zodiac included a detailed diagram of his bus bomb. P.S. I hope you have fun trying to figure out who I killed. Cross circle, 10 SFPD 0. The 13-symbol cipher has never been solved. However, numerous theories allude to the Zodiac's real name. The use of the phrase Blue Meanie is believed to be in reference to the Beatles' 1968 animated film, The Yellow Submarine, referring to the uniformed ogres that would go on to become a popular euphemism for the police. The killer now claimed an official tally of 10 victims in total. However, at this point, only 5 were known to police and verified as confirmed Zodiac victims. The threat of bombing a bus went unreported by authorities until later in the month, when a note arrived at the Chronicle which demanded publication. The note was postmarked April 28, 1970, and was written on a Jolly Roger branded greeting card. The card featured a cartoon drawing of a prospector riding atop a dragon with the words, "Sorry to hear your ass is a dragon," printed next to it. The text was written in the Zodiac's usual style and featured the now all too familiar cross-circle symbol. I hope you enjoy yourselves when I have my blast. P.S. on back. On the rear side of the card, the Zodiac wrote a threatening message. If you don't want me to have this blast, you must do 2 things. 1, tell every one about the bus bomb with all the details. 2, I would like to see some nice Zodiac butons wandering about town. Every one else has these buttons like peace symbol, black power, Melvin eats, blubber, etc. Well, it would cheer me up considerably if I saw a lot of people wearing my buton. Please, no nasty ones like Melvin's. Thank you. This communication differed from most because it did not contain the usual introduction. This is the Zodiac speaking, like almost every letter preceding it. In future letters, the Zodiac would refer to Zodiac buttons and his desire for people to wear them. An undisclosed number of latent fingerprints were found on the envelope and card by evidence technicians. However, it is unknown if these were left by a mail carrier or the killer, but it was believed those on the card were left by the Zodiac. The authorities finally revealed the bomb threat to the public on April 29, 1970. However, the schematics were not published until 1986, when they were included in Graysmith's Zodiac. The next communication was sent on June 26 to the Chronicle and contained another cipher, as well as a Phillips 66 road map of the Bay Area. The map was annotated with a custom clock face, drawn across the summit of Mount Diablo in the style of the Zodiac symbol, which consisted of a 0 at the top, a 6 at the bottom, a numeral 3 on the right side, and a 9 on the left. A written note next to the annotation indicated the 0 is to be set to Mag N. The letter was back to the old-style introduction of previous Zodiac letter. This is the Zodiac speaking. I have become very angry with the people of the San Fran Bay Area. They have not, underlined, complied with my wishes for them to wear some nice cross-circle buttons. I promised to punish them if they did not comply by annihilating a full school bus. But now school is out for the summer, so I punished them in another way. I shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38 cross circle, 12 SFPD 0. The map coupled with this code will tell you where the bomb is set. You have until next fall to dig it up. The Zodiac now claimed another 2 victims since his April 20th, 1970 letter, bringing his alleged total up to 12. In this latest letter, the killer confesses to having shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38 pistol. 6 days before the letter was mailed, SFPD officer Richard Radtick was shot to death with a .38 caliber weapon while sitting in his vehicle writing out a traffic ticket. The area of the crime scene, in the Lower Haight district of San Francisco, is located just 450 feet from the home of Zodiac suspect Rick Marshall, who resided at 143 Scott Street. It appeared the Zodiac was taking credit for the murder of Officer Radtick. However, a witness to the crime would go on to identify an ex-convict by the name of Joseph Wesley Johnson, a black man who looked nothing like any of the witness descriptions of the Zodiac. The SFPD believed the letter's claim was false, and that most investigators agree the Zodiac was attempting to claim credit for a murder he did not commit to further instill fear in the residents of San Francisco, and suspected the killer did not learn the police had already identified a suspect. Several months later, on July 24th, a short note was sent to the Chronicle, which apparently claimed credit for the kidnapping of Kathleen Johns. Despite some press coverage of the attempted abduction, only the Modesto Bee reported the detail that her car had been burned by the assailant, which many believed was proof that the man who accosted Johns was indeed the Zodiac. The note was composed along similar lines as previous Zodiac communications and made another reference to people wearing Zodiac buttons. This is the Zodiac speaking. I am rather unhappy because you people will not wear some nice cross-circle buttons. So I now have a little list, starting with that woman plus her baby that I gave a rather interesting ride for a couple hours one evening a few months back that ended in my burning her car, where I found them. 2 days later, on July 27th, another letter from the Zodiac arrived at the Chronicle. Postmarked the previous day, the author once again talked about people wearing Zodiac buttons and threatened to torture his 13 victims, who he referred to as his slaves in the afterlife if his demand was not fulfilled. He then went on to describe in detail some of the torture these alleged victims would suffer. This is the Zodiac speaking. Being that you will not wear some nice cross-circle buttons, how about wearing some nasty cross-solcy buttons, or any type of cross-solcy buttons that you can think up. If you do not wear any type of cross-circle buttons, I shall, on top of everything else, torture all 13 of my slaves that I have, waiting for me in paradise. Some I shall tie over ant hills, and watch them scream plus twitch, and squirm. Others shall have pine splinters driven under their nails plus then burned. Others shall be placed in cages plus fed salt beef until they are gorged. Then I shall listen to their pleas for water, and I shall laugh at them. Others will hang by their thumbs plus burn in the sun. Then I will rub them down with deep head to warm them up. Others I shall skin them alive plus let them run around screaming. And all billiard players I shall have them play in a dark dungeon, all with crooked cues plus twisted shoes. Yes, I shall have great fun inflicting the most delicious of pain to my slaves. Accompanying the letter was a lengthy distortion of the song I've Got a Little List from the Gilbert and Sullivan's musical, The Mikado. The postscript referenced the June letter and the unsolved 32-character cipher, the directions of which the Zodiac intended to help police find the bomb he buried. As someday it may happen that a victim must be found. I've got a little list. I've got a little list of society. Offenders who might well be underground, who would never be missed, who would never be missed. There is the pest, ulentual nuisances who write for autographs, all people who have flabby hands and irritate ing laughs, all children who are up in dates and implore you with implat, all people who are shaking hands shake hands like that, and all third persons who with unspoiling take those who insist they'd none of them be missed. They'd none of them be missed. There's the banjo serenader and the others of his race and the piano organist. I got him on the list. All people who eat peppermint and fomfit in your face, they would never be missed. They would never be missed. And the idiot who phrases within enthusiastic tone of centuries, but this in every country but his own, and the lady from the provinces who dress like a guy who doesn't cry, and the singirly abnormally, the girl who never kissed. I don't think she would be missed. I'm sure she wouldn't be missed. And that nice impriest that is rather rife the Judic eel humorist, I've got him on the list. All funny fellows come Mike men and clowns of private life. They'd none of them be missed. They'd none of them be missed. And uncompromising kind such as Wakamakallet, Thingamabob, and like wise, well, never mind, and tut 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 tut, and watch his name, and you know who, but the task of filling up the blanks I rather leave up to you. But it really does an't matter whom you place upon the list, for none of them be missed, none of them be missed. After several months of silence, the Zodiac sent 2 cards in October 1970. This first postcard was addressed to San Francisco Chronicle, SF, and contained a collage of words and letters cut from newspapers and magazines and oddly with 13 holes punched along the side. It was postmarked October 5th, 1970 and read, "Dear Editor, you'll hate me, but I've got to tell you. The pace isn't any slower. In fact, it's just one big 13th. 13. Some of them thought it was horrible. P.S. There are reports. City police pig cops are closing in on me. FK. I'm crack-proof. What is the price tag now?" This first postcard was originally considered to be a hoax. However, investigators came to believe it genuine because of the declaration of 13 victims, something the killer had alluded to in previous communications, including the last letter, which had not been made public. Several phrases from the card were also to be repeated in future Zodiac letters, including the word crack-proof, which would be mentioned in a letter sent 5 months later to the Los Angeles Times. The second postcard arrived on October 27th, in the form of a customized Halloween greeting card, which was addressed personally to Chronicle reporter Paul Avery, but was misspelled as Averly. The envelope also contained a symbol in the top left-hand corner, which consisted of a V-shaped drawing, with 4 dots and Z underneath. The envelope contained a note with "Sorry, no cipher," written in the shape of a X, and the Halloween card, which had text and images on both sides. The front depicted a skeleton holding a pumpkin around his midsection with the words, "From your secret pal." At the top and towards the left side of the skeleton were the words, "I feel it in my bones, you ache to know my name, and so I'll clue you in." In a white section to the left of the image were the words, "Paradis," and "Slaves," which overlapped in the form of a cross, and in each corner the Zodiac had presumably written the methods he acquired his victims. In the top left corner was written, "By fire," the top right, "By gun," the bottom left, "By knife," and bottom right, "By rope." On the reverse side was a drawing of what appeared to be a tree with 13 eyes, around one of which was written the message, "Peek-boo, you are doomed." The eyes all face another drawing of a skeleton, above which was written 14, and then the message, "But then why spoil the game," was written underneath and behind the body of the skeleton. "Happy Halloween" appeared at the legs, and underneath was the same unusual symbol which appeared on the envelope, along with the Zodiac's cross-circle symbol. Kathleen Johns, the woman who was kidnapped along with her baby by the Zodiac, would later state in interviews that she also received a similar Halloween card around the same time from the killer. She would also claim she forwarded the card onto Paul Avery. However, there has never been any evidence of a second Halloween card in any published works on the Zodiac. The words, "Peek-boo, you are doomed," were perceived as a threat to Avery's life. As a result, the Chronicle subsequently published a front-page story about the incident on October 31st, which resulted in numerous replies from the public. Amongst these was an anonymous letter sent from Riverside which urged Paul Avery to begin an investigation into a potential link between the Zodiac case and the still unsolved murder of Sherry Jo Bates on October 30th, 1966. Robert Graysmith published a transcription of the letter in his book Zodiac, which read, "Please forward the contents of this letter to the detective in charge of the Zodiac murder case. I hope this information will also help you, as we would both like to see this case solved. As for myself, I wish to remain anonymous, and I know that you will understand why. A few years ago in Riverside, California, a young girl was murdered, just about, I believe, on Halloween evening. I could write a much longer letter, citing the similarities between Zodiac's case and this murder, which occurred in Riverside, but if the police department cannot see said comparative similarities between these two cases, then I will take a slow boat to China. Even if these two crimes were committed by two different people. I think, after all the facts are studied regarding both of these cases, if police have not already investigated these possibilities and are not already aware of the Riverside case, then even so perhaps they should look into it. Letters to newspapers, similar erratic printing, find out about these two different cases. Give Captain Cross a call on the phone. He knows that I do not quit. Mr. Avery, I will give you a call in the near future. Please look into the case. The Riverside police have a wealth of information. So does San Francisco. Let us hope that they are not too proud to work together. And if they already are, let us hope that there has been an exchange of information. Avery began his investigation by visiting Riverside and reviewing their evidence, locating the year-old letter from the chief of the Riverside police to a Napa County detective, in which he presented his opinions on the similarity between the Bates murder and the crimes committed by the Zodiac. Avery studied the many letters sent to both the Riverside police and press, which included some with what appeared to be a Z, used as a signature. On his insistence, a meeting was arranged and detectives from San Francisco, Solano and Napa counties were invited to compare notes on the Bates murder and the known Zodiac murders committed in their respective jurisdictions. It was the opinion of SFPD Inspector Bill Armstrong that the link between the Riverside murder and the Zodiac crimes was strong enough to believe they were committed by the same person. The handwriting left on the desk at the Riverside City College's library was compared to the handwriting in the Zodiac letters by state handwriting expert Sherwood Morrill, who professed his professional opinion that they were written by the same man. The detectives from Riverside were less convinced of the connection, primarily due to the number of stab wounds received by Bates, something which had not been revealed to the other counties, which had suggested it was perhaps a crime of passion or rage killing, something which was not evident in the Zodiac crimes. Avery published his story in the Chronicle about the Riverside connection on November 16, 1970. Opinion on the Riverside connection has divided investigators. The two Vallejo attacks attributed to the Zodiac showed a well-planned blitz-style attack with a handgun, followed by a quick, well-controlled exit from the crime scene. It appears the person responsible for the Riverside murder did not actively plan to kill Sherry Jo Bates, because he conversed with her for over an hour before losing control and stabbing her. Bates' killer was actually ill-prepared for the attack, using only a small pocket knife against a young woman who fought furiously for her own life. The only pre-planning involved sabotaging Bates' vehicle, which was more a means to an end in rendering her dependent on the killer's offer of help. In a slight contrast, the Zodiac went to great lengths to subdue his victims at the lakeside, but this attack was closer in style to the Riverside murder than those in Vallejo. The Zodiac engaged in some verbal exchange with his victims before launching a brutal knife attack, and there could be little doubt about his intentions given the weapons he brought to the scene. This has been argued why the Riverside murder could be considered the first committed by the Zodiac, who would become more audacious and better prepared during his future crimes. Detective Bill Baker, of the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department, had been assigned to a cold case involving the murder of a young couple in June 1963. 18-year-old Robert Domingos and 17-year-old Linda Edwards were high school students living in Lompoc, near Santa Barbara, who both decided to spend the senior ditch day at a secluded spot on Gaviota Beach instead of going to the school's official party. At some point during their time there someone confronted the couple and opened fire, with Robert shot 11 times and Linda 8. The bodies were then placed inside a makeshift shack where the killer attempted to set a fire to remove evidence. In 1970, Detective Baker examined the case evidence and sent out a teletype press release to other jurisdictions seeking any information on similar cases. He was then contacted by Inspector Bill Armstrong of the San Francisco Police Department. Armstrong and his partner Inspector Dave Tashi shared their suspicions that the Zodiac may have been responsible for the murders of Domingos and Edwards because it contained many similar elements. Another individual was considered the prime suspect, and who was also believed to have committed another murder, that of Vernon C. Smith in Lompoc the previous day. This individual, known only as Sandy, has never been apprehended, and his identity remains as much of a mystery as the Zodiac. At first glance, it appeared the murder exhibited only a few of the hallmarks associated with the Zodiac attack, but when investigators revealed the killer used some pre-cut lengths of rope to tie the victims, it became all too eerily familiar. Detectives believed the man had ordered Linda to tie up Robert's hands, and afterwards, when he attempted to bind Linda, Robert somehow managed to free himself and fought back. It was at this moment that the killer shot both the victims to prevent their possible escape. It bore a striking similarity to the events which transpired at Lake Berryessa, including the targeting of a young couple at an isolated spot, the use pre-cut bindings, and a gun with .22 caliber ammunition, which was similar to that used by the Zodiac. There were also numerous differences between this crime and those of the Zodiac, such as the handling of the bodies and the killer remaining in the area after the murders, in a failed attempt to obliterate traces of evidence. The Zodiac lingered only momentarily at the scenes of his crimes, and would make no such efforts in removing evidence, leaving the bodies where they were. The only time the killer made a concerted effort to remove evidence was during the Stein murder, when he wiped down in and outside of the cab for fingerprints. The Zodiac never claimed credit for the murders of Domingos and Edwards, which predated the Riverside murder of Sherry Jo Bates, which many suspect was the Zodiac's first crime. If the Gaviota Beach murders was the work of Zodiac, then it would have been his very first crime. Other crimes considered similar to those committed by the Zodiac have been suggested as possible murders for which the killer never claimed credit. The November 1960 murders of couple Larry Payton and Beverly Allen bore many of the hallmarks of a Zodiac slaying. 3 men were arrested for this crime, and 2 were subsequently jailed. However, their culpability has been questioned. The crime is believed to have been the work of serial killer Edward Wayne Edwards, who investigators proposed as a potential Zodiac suspect. However, in the opinion of law enforcement, Edwards has never been a serious suspect. After a long period with no communication, the Zodiac finally ended his 5-month-long silence by sending a letter on March 22, 1971, this time to the Los Angeles Times, something the killer had never done before. The letter was also the first to be sent from an area outside of San Francisco, being postmarked from Pleasanton, which was 15 miles east of the bay. This is the Zodiac speaking. Like I have always said, I am crack-proof. If the blue meanies are ever gonna catch me, they had best get off their fat asses. Plus do something. Because the longer they fiddle plus fart around, the more slaves I will collect for my after life. I do have to give them credit for stumbling across my Riverside activity, but they're only finding the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there. The reason I'm writing to the Times is this: they don't bury me on the back pages like some of the others. There were some suspicions that this letter was a fake, with some of those involved in the case, such as RPD Detective Mike Butterfield, suggesting it might have been authored by the same individual who sent the anonymous postcard to Paul Avery on October 27, 1970, which presented the link between the Zodiac and the Riverside murder. There were some who suspected SFPD Inspector Dave Tashi of having authored the letter. However, there was not enough evidence to suggest either theory was correct. A week later, on March 22nd, another postcard was sent by the Zodiac. However, this one was intercepted by a worker of the U.S. Postal Service who recognized the unique style before it was delivered. There was some confusion over the intended recipient, with the envelope containing Paul Avery's name, once more misspelled as Averly, while the return side contained no specific address. Instead, the Zodiac had glued newspaper cutouts of various newspapers such as San Francisco Chronicle, The Times, and SF Examiner, which had been cut from each respective paper. The author added the Zodiac's cross-circle design, which consisted of a hole punched in the top left-hand corner, along with 4 lines drawn in place, which represented the Zodiac's well-known symbol and the word Zodiac written above. Additional holes had also been notched along the entire perimeter of the card by use of a hole punch, and consisted of a sketch of a condominium complex known as Sierra Club, which had been under development at Incline Village, which was near Lake Tahoe, Nevada. This same picture had appeared several days prior, when the Chronicle ran an advertisement 3 days earlier for the Sierra Club complex, which was known as Forest Pines between 1967 and 1970. There were several phrases typed on the card, such as "Sought Victim 12," "Around in the Snow," and "Peek Through the Pines," as well as the Zodiac's cross-circle symbol in the bottom right-hand corner. The authorship of this postcard is also called into question, despite the handwriting being similar to that of previous Zodiac communications, and the use of the misspelling of Avery as Averly, and the use of a hole punch. This card would be the last confirmed communication from the Zodiac, who went almost 3 years without sending the police or press any more letters. The meaning of the Lake Tahoe Sierra Club postcard has never been fully explained, and neither has the identity of Victim 12, whilst its authenticity as a Zodiac communication is also debated. One potential incident has been linked to this postcard as a possible resolution. On September 6, 1970, Donna Lass disappeared from Sahara Tahoe in South Lake Tahoe at approximately 2 a.m. The 25-year-old nurse worked at the Letterman General Hospital in the Presidio and was assigned to the graveyard shift, but was working that day at the Sahara Casino. The last entry in her nurse's logbook was at 1:50 a.m., and curiously she wasn't seen leaving the Sahara, even though officers found her car parked at her apartment complex in nearby State Line. The following day, an unknown male caller contacted both her employer and landlord, stating that Lass wouldn't be returning because of a family emergency. This call was later revealed to be a hoax, but police were unable to determine who the mystery caller was or what happened to Lass. It was suspected she had been abducted shortly after arriving at her apartment, but there was no evidence as to her whereabouts. Her case was considered to be possibly linked to the disappearance and death of Sacramento nurse Judith and Harkey, which occurred in March 1969. On January 24, 1992, Kathleen Johns would identify Lawrence Kane from an 18-picture lineup as the man who abducted her and her daughter. Although Kane is considered a suspect in the Zodiac murders, there is little evidence to connect him to the crimes. There is only circumstantial evidence that he was responsible for the disappearance of Donna Lass, who was claimed as a victim of the Zodiac. However, he is a prime suspect in the murder of Dana Lull, who was abducted and later killed by an unknown man on April 27, 1974. But there is little to connect the abduction of Donna Lass with the Zodiac case. At the time of her disappearance, she was living just a few blocks away from the scene of the Zodiac's murder of Paul Stein on October 11, 1969. The postcards seem to heavily imply that Lass was a victim of the killer. However, there was never any proof, unlike the Stein case in which the Zodiac sent swatches of his bloodied shirt. Although the Zodiac allegedly kidnapped Kathleen Johns, he always left the bodies of his victims where they could be discovered. It was been suspected the communication is fake, and in 1999, a former investigator admitted to forging the postcard. The Zodiac Killer was released in cinemas on April 7, 1971, starring Hal Reed, Bob Jones, Ray Lynch, and Tom Pittman, with Reed played the Zodiac. Although the plot of the film is based on the San Francisco murders, the writers and director decided to give the unidentified killer a name and backstory in a heavily fictionalized portrayal. The story focuses on a month in the life of the Zodiac Killer, with the third act of the film attempting to provide a motive to the series of crimes. During the film's opening night screening at San Francisco's RKO Golden Gate Theater in April 1971, audience members were encouraged to write their answers to the question, "I think the Zodiac kills because," and drop their suggestions into a large box in an effort to win a motorcycle donated by Kawasaki. Unbeknown to the unsuspecting film attendees, a volunteer was positioned inside the box and compared handwriting on the cards with samples of the Zodiacs. There were also goons made up from the film's cast waiting in the wings and ready to apprehend and interrogate anyone whose writing was deemed suspiciously similar to the Zodiac. Later that same year, on December 23, 1971, the American neo-noir action thriller Dirty Harry was released in cinemas. The film, starring Clint Eastwood as the titular detective Harry Callahan, drew heavily on the crimes of the Zodiac Killer, while the villainous character of Scorpio, played by Andrew Robinson, was based loosely on the Zodiac. Set in San Francisco, the Scorpio shoots a woman and leaves behind a blackmail letter demanding $100,000 or he will kill more people. He later kidnaps a teenager and demands more money, but is thwarted and forced to escape. In one particularly memorable scene from the film, Scorpio hijacks a school bus, in much the same way as the Zodiac threatened to do in some of his letters. The screenwriters R.M. Fink and Harry Julian Fink explained how they based the main character Harry Callahan, portrayed by Eastwood, on San Francisco Police Department Detective David Tashi. On August 4, 1971, detectives Mulinox, Tashi and Armstrong interviewed Zodiac suspect Arthur Lee Allen at his place of work, informing him that they had received information from an unnamed informant about certain statements he had allegedly made in January 1968. During the interview, Allen would prove he was extremely knowledgeable about the Zodiac case and had humorously decided to run circles around the detectives interrogating him. He displayed a distinct understanding of the pop culture references used by the Zodiac, and although he had clearly been reading the media reports about the killer, appeared he knew nothing about the actual crimes. The following year, on Wednesday, October 28, 1987, another letter arrived at the Vallejo Times-Herald, purportedly from the Zodiac Killer. It was postmarked Tuesday from San Francisco and arrived several days before Halloween. It appeared from the first few lines that this letter was also word-for-word verbatim of the April 24, 1978 letter that led to Inspector Tashi's demotion. Fred Shirasago, a criminal intelligence specialist with the State Department of Justice, said that a handwriting expert would analyze the letter and dust it for fingerprints. Police Lieutenant Gerald Greenhouse added, "We'll know if it's authentic." Vallejo Captain Roy Conway soon announced that this latest letter was a forgery. "It's a fake. It's a hoax," he said of the Halloween letter. He added the letter was not authored by the authentic Zodiac, but that is a simulation of a hoax letter written in 1978. Robert Prouty, chief of the state's question documents section, said, "My very firm opinion is that they 1987 letters were not written by the authentic Zodiac. They appear to be composed of previous letters which have since been made public." Melinda Stair of the Attorney General's office announced that handwriting experts had confirmed the October 1987 was a simulation of a letter sent to the San Francisco Chronicle a decade ago. "Someone saw the letter and was using it as a copy," Stair said. It appeared the author of the 1987 letter, someone pretending to be the Zodiac, had used the April 1978 letter that was confirmed as a fake in order to compose his fake letter and pass it off as genuine. Beginning in March 1990, a series of shootings occurred in New York City in what appeared to be random attacks. The first and second victims survived, but the third died later in hospital after being shot in May 1990. Letters sent to the New York Post and 60 Minutes strengthened a theory that some detectives already suspected about the killer, that he was the San Francisco Zodiac. The letters were written in a bizarre style and contained the phrase, "This is the Zodiac," in a similar but not identical calling card of the original Zodiac. But it soon became apparent that this was not the same criminal. But this did not stop the media from sensationalizing this latest string of Zodiac killer crimes, something that caused fear to New Yorkers who believed they were now subject to the Zodiac's killing spree. After his fourth victim survived, the New York Zodiac wrote to the Post claiming, "In San Francisco killed a man in the park with a gun, and killed a woman with a knife, and killed a man in the taxi cab with gun." The killer was attempting to connect his crimes with those of the original Zodiac, but few were fooled. A further 6 people were shot by the New York Zodiac, 2 of whom died from their wounds. Much like his San Francisco counterpart, Zodiac 2 also sent coded messages to the police and press, and much like the original, this killer went long periods without killing. Then, in 1993, the Zodiac's reign of terror appeared to have ended. It would take several years before the perpetrator was caught, during a chance encounter at the Zodiac 2's family home, where a domestic disturbance call would lead to his arrest. On May 27, 1997, just before pupils arrived at the Tainohata Elementary School in the Suma ward of Kobe, Japan, the head of student June Hayes was found in front of the school gates. The victim had been beheaded with a handsaw, and the remains left for students to discover when they arrived that morning. A note, written in red pen, was found stuck in his mouth. The letter identified the killer as Sakakibara, and read in part, "This is the beginning of the game. Try and stop me if you can, stupid police." Due to the symbolism used and the style of the letter, it was clear that the author was influenced by the Zodiac murders of San Francisco. Several more attacks were committed by the same killer, and a young girl, Ayaka Yamashita, was murdered. On June 28th, a 14-year-old high school student was arrested for the crimes. Known as Boya in the media, his real name was not officially released due to Japanese law. However, he was eventually identified as Shinichiro Azuma. During the course of the investigation, there have been numerous developments, including the solution to one of the Zodiac ciphers, as well as promising suspects that have been proposed as recently as October 2021. However, none have been officially accepted by law enforcement and investigators as a definitive resolution to the case. The only way the Zodiac case will ever be solved now is with a breakthrough in DNA, much in the same way the Golden State Killer was apprehended, or if evidence or a confession is left by the perpetrator after their death. Until then, the case will remain one of the high-profile unsolved serial murder investigations. Case 3. Kanae Kojima, 34 years old, from Hokkaido, has a modest appearance with a weight. Strangely, not a few men were infatuated with this woman, even willing to hand over all their money. And this woman caused at least 3 men to lose their lives, yet when they died, all 3 still had smiles on their faces. Even after being sentenced to death, Kanae Kojima married 3 times while in prison, and some people even tried to find ways to help her escape justice. Kojima's deceitful acts and crimes were meticulously calculated and shocked all of Japan. The murderer was dubbed the Konkatsu Killer by the media because of the Konkatsu, marriage matchmaking, websites she frequented. She once dated 30 men at the same time, 3 of whom took their own lives due to her manipulation. Kojima stirred up public outrage when her crimes were uncovered, sparking intense curiosity about the charm of this killer. Normally, only beautiful women can attract many men at once, but Kanae Kojima was an exception. Domestic and international media were stunned when they saw the first images of this murderer. The woman, standing 155 centimeters tall, weighing over 210 pounds, with a double chin, an asymmetrical face, squinty eyes, a barrel-shaped waist, and rough, dark skin defied conventional notions of beauty. Yet, this obese, unattractive middle-aged woman made men willingly give up their money, cars, homes, and ultimately their lives for her. This is a true story, so bizarre it seems like it was pulled from a fictional script. One day, in August 2009, a police station in Japan received a report about a suicide case. A witness claimed someone sought by burning charcoal in a car. Upon learning the location of the incident, the police immediately arrived at the scene to investigate. The deceased was identified as Yoshiyuki Oid, 41 years old. Police found charcoal and a stove in the car, the victim smiling, with no trace of charcoal on his hands. Examination of the stomach contents revealed that the victim had consumed a large amount of sleeping pills before his death. The car key was not found at the scene, and the investigation showed that someone used matches to light the charcoal, but no matchbox was found. Just 10 hours before being found dead, Oid wrote on his blog about a future filled with hope. He announced plans to introduce his fiancée, Kanae Kojima, 35, to his parents after the two returned from a trip together. Clearly, this was not a suicide note, and his blog post indicated the victim had no reason to take such an extreme step. Numerous unusual details suggested the victim did not seek death, but was deliberately murdered by someone else. Investigators began looking into suspects around Yoshiyuki Oid, and Kanae Kojima's name came under police scrutiny. Shortly before his death, Oid transferred approximately $35 to Kojima's bank account. Through an in-depth investigation, the police discovered an astonishing truth. The charcoal and stove used by Yoshiyuki Oid to commit suicide were actually purchased by Kanae Kojima. This new discovery shifted all police suspicion toward the woman. When questioned, Kojima admitted to buying the charcoal for Yoshiyuki Oid, but adamantly denied killing her fiancé. The police, of course, did not believe her statement and decided to continue their investigation, which began to uncover shocking truths. Worse still, police found that Yoshiyuki Oid did not appear to be the first victim associated with this woman. Prior to Oid's death, Kanae Kojima had also dated two other men. They were Takao Terada, 53, and Kenzo Ando, 80. Both men had died in a manner similar to Oid. In a short period, 3 men closely associated with Kanae Kojima mysteriously died in the same way. This led investigators to wonder if something was amiss. According to police investigations, Kojima was the last person all 3 men met before their deaths. The cause of all 3 deaths was carbon monoxide poisoning. Moreover, Kojima received significant sums of money from these men. Investigators retrieved the autopsy reports of the 2 other men and found large amounts of sleeping pills in both victims. At this point, Kanae Kojima could no longer deny her involvement and was officially arrested by the police. When Kojima's Tokyo apartment was searched on November 3, 2009, police found a large quantity of medications, including cold medicine and sedatives, prescribed by at least 10 different doctors. Kojima had met the men on online dating websites and poisoned them by burning charcoal after administering sleeping pills. Kojima was believed to have staged each death to look like an A*** hole. She was accused of defrauding her victims of over $828, which funded her lavish and extravagant lifestyle. According to acquaintances, Kojima frequently traveled, stayed in 5-star hotels, purchased luxury items, and owned a red Mercedes-Benz. For years, no one suspected that Kojima, living under the alias Yoshikawa Sakura, and claiming to be the daughter of a University of Tokyo professor, was both a fraudster and a murderer. All her neighbors were completely unaware that Kojima was actually both a con artist and a killer. Kanae Kojima's life was as dramatic and twisted as any movie plot we often see on television. On a cold winter day in 1974, Kanae Kojima was born into a middle-class family in Hokkaido. Her father was a stable and responsible civil servant, while her mother was a piano teacher. Growing up in this environment, Kanae Kojima enjoyed extremely favorable educational conditions. However, as the eldest daughter in the family, she also had to bear the brunt of the pressure of her parents' high expectations early on. Her father set strict academic performance standards, while her mother hoped Kojima would inherit her artistic talents and started teaching her piano at a young age. Under this upbringing, Kanae Kojima not only excelled academically, but also learned piano and baking skills. However, Kojima's average, if not unattractive, appearance did not help her gain the affection of her school peers. With a slightly overweight build and average looks, Kojima quickly became the target of her classmates' mockery. Facing isolation and ridicule, Kanae Kojima grew increasingly withdrawn, becoming sullen and less talkative. At a time when she felt completely isolated and helpless, a 40-year-old man entered her life during her high school years. Kanae Kojima fell deeply in love with this older man, obeying his every word and ready to fulfill almost any of his requests. One day, this 40-year-old lover confided in her about financial difficulties in his business and asked for her help. Blinded by love, Kojima recklessly stole over $19,000 from her father to assist him. But to her heartbreak, the man disappeared without a trace after receiving the money. This deceitful first love left a deep scar on Kanae Kojima's heart. When her parents discovered that their daughter had stolen a large sum of money to give to a complete stranger, they were shocked and deeply disappointed. Kojima's actions caused significant harm to her family, leading to a heated argument with her parents. She then left home in anger and decided to cut ties with her past completely. Alone, Kojima set off for bustling Tokyo, determined to start over. In the early days of her arrival in the glamorous city, Kojima struggled to find a stable job. People were prejudiced against her as an older, unattractive woman with a somewhat reserved personality. Kanae Kojima felt lonely and deeply frustrated, but to change her circumstances, she began devising various plans. Kojima later signed up for a dating club, which was essentially a front for prostitution. At these clubs, male clients would choose women based on provided information, and if satisfied, proceed with a transaction. Due to her lack of beauty, standing only 155 centimeters tall and weighing over 210 pounds, Kojima initially attracted little attention from clients. However, she began learning how to win over men. Thanks to her sweet talk, gentle demeanor, and ability to praise and obey, Kojima gained regular clients. To earn more money, Kojima started a plan to target multiple wealthy men simultaneously. She adopted the alias Yoshikawa Sakura and posted on various Japanese dating websites. Of course, the online world is a facade, and Kanae Kojima could entirely construct a persona of herself as a gentle and skilled cook. In her blogs and dating profiles, Kojima described herself as a talented chef with a chic fashion sense and an impressive family background. She edited and cropped her photos to appear more attractive. She frequently changed her profession, sometimes claiming to be a nurse, a teacher, or even a real estate investor. After some activities online, Kanae Kojima discovered that middle-aged and elderly men were easier to deceive. Thus, the woman meticulously planned to lure these men into her sweet trap. Her advantage did not lie in beauty, figure, or wealth. So what was this woman's secret weapon for catching men? Kojima was acutely aware of her shortcomings and knew her only advantage was her youth. With this in mind, she shifted her focus to middle-aged men over 40. These men often had financial stability and were usually less concerned with women's appearances. While her physical appearance was difficult to change, Kanae decided to increase her appeal in other ways. She leveraged her cooking background by enrolling in culinary classes and creating a social media account as a food blogger. Through her posts, she showcased her cooking skills and carefully built an image of herself as a gentle and caring woman. Her efforts paid off, as this persona proved highly attractive to men in their 40s. In June 2001, Kojima began a relationship with an older man from Chiba Prefecture and received over $600,000 from him. After this wealthy man passed away, Kojima turned to dating websites, pretending to search for a husband while actually seeking new sources of income. Kojima approached over 20 different men through these sites, using various methods to entice them into giving her money. People often come across scumbag men who date multiple girlfriends at the same time, but Kojima's showed she was even more skilled than those scumbags, a woman capable of playing with the minds and time of men, even mastering psychological manipulation. This woman was not satisfied with targeting just one man at a time. Kanae Kojima had relationships with over 30 men, almost simultaneously within a year. During this period, she maintained over a dozen blogs under different identities, ensuring regular updates with 2.0 posts. Like a seasoned hunter, she skillfully targeted the deep desires and insecurities in the hearts of older, single men. Under the subtle manipulation of Kanae Kojima, these men seemed to find themselves part of a carefully staged play, with Kojima as the confident and talented lead actress. However, behind that glamorous facade, her true motives were known to very few. In some cases, Kojima agreed to marry her victims, and then claimed she urgently needed financial support to complete her studies. After telling these tragic stories, Kojima took the money and cut off all contact with her fiancés. In other cases, she asked her victims for large sums of money to cover wedding expenses, and then completely disappeared, leaving the gullible men behind. What enabled Kojima to carry out these sinister schemes was her ability to make lonely men feel loved and cared for, and she was highly successful at it. Some say that a beautiful appearance can easily attract a man, but it may not guarantee keeping him. At times, the woman a man has an affair with may not be more beautiful than his wife, but has an extraordinary charm that captivates him. Exploiting this very notion, Kojima seduced many men who were unhappy in their marriages and turned them into lucrative prey. To win a man's heart, you must first win his stomach. Kojima lured men with her cooking skills and exceptional bedroom abilities, then drained their money to fund her luxurious lifestyle. When these men could no longer provide for her, she poisoned their food and ended their lives. In just a few years, Kojima amassed over $2 million from her romantic relationships. Most of Kojima's victims were high-income earners, gullible, and without life partners. After killing these unfortunate men, the woman staged the scenes to look like S***T. The list of Kojima's victims spanned various ages and professions. In February 2001, Kojima met Sadao Fukuyama, a businessman over 60 years old, at a bar and became his lover after just 2 weeks of conversation. Kojima swindled nearly 74 million yen from her lover and broke up with him once there was nothing left to extract. Fukuyama's body was later found in his bathroom, and the cause of death was deemed an accident. In January 2009, Takao Terada, 53, was found dead at his home in Ome, Tokyo. Terada, a systems engineer, was unmarried and highly introverted. The cause of death was determined to be carbon monoxide poisoning. With no signs of struggle and a charcoal stove found in the house, police concluded it was S***T and did not investigate further. In May 2009, Kenzo Ando, 80, died in a house fire that burned his home to the ground. Ando was a truck driver. A charcoal stove was found next to Ando's body, and police analyzed that the stove had ignited nearby papers, causing the fire to spread. Ando died from respiratory burns and carbon monoxide poisoning. Kojima became a suspect when the sleeping pill components found in Ando's body matched medications prescribed under her name. However, the police lacked conclusive evidence, allowing Kojima to escape justice once again. The woman's string of consecutive crimes was only interrupted when police uncovered irregularities in the death of victim Oid. In 2010, the Saitama Prefectural Court tried Kojima on 3 counts of murder, along with numerous fraud and theft charges. The case was extremely complex, lasting over 100 days, with 83 hearings and 63 witnesses called. Over 100 people lined up for fewer than 50 seats available in the courtroom gallery. On April 13, 2012, Kanae Kojima, 37 years old, was sentenced to death by a judge at the Saitama District Court for murdering 3 men. The judge declared there was no room for leniency, as the defendant had committed horrific crimes, repeatedly offered unreasonable excuses in court, and showed no remorse. The most dramatic part of the trial was the division of opinions into 2 opposing sides right in the courtroom. One side argued that the woman deliberately committed murder, while the other insisted that the men had taken their own lives. After being imprisoned, Kanae Kojima showed no remorse and continued to seek new prey. First, she started a blog documenting her life in prison, then conversed with fans to find suitable targets. Remarkably, even while on death row awaiting execution, Kojima cheerfully shared her life on her personal blog and still maintained a considerable fan base. Mr. Doi, who managed her blog, had exchanged letters with Kanae Kojima for over a year. Initially, Mr. Doi was drawn to the handwriting of this woman. After learning about Kojima's experiences, he found her to be a very kind and caring person. As the letters became more frequent, Mr. Doi fell in love with Kojima and courageously confessed his feelings to her. Kojima happily accepted his proposal, and the two eventually agreed to marry. 6 months later, Mr. Doi suffered a car accident and became bedridden, seemingly ending the peculiar relationship between Kanae Kojima and Mr. Doi. Unexpectedly, not only did they not divorce, but they upgraded their relationship and became adoptive parent and child. This relationship was truly shocking. The public buzzed with the question of whether there was anything in this world that Kojima couldn't do. After divorcing Mr. Doi, Kojima married 2 more times, with the last being to a journalist who had interviewed her. At the time, the journalist was very curious about Kojima and interviewed her. After getting to know her, he was highly impressed by her. The journalist stated, "You only see her exterior, but don't understand her heart. I think Kojima is a very gentle and kind girl. She is my dream partner." In 2017, the court retried Kojima's case and finally sentenced the murderer to death. In court, Kanae Kojima still refused to admit her guilt. She even said, "Men dream of having a gentle, obedient partner who cooks well. I just became that person and exchanged it for what I needed. Is that wrong?" In 2019, Kojima was transferred to the death row block of Tokyo prison. It is truly sad that even in the moments leading to her death, Kanae Kojima never recognized her wrongdoings.